I was about to undergo the Great Reformation ritual, performed by one of the strongest martial artists in the Murim world. Once completed, I would officially inherit the Tang clan name. The ritual was incredibly painful. It involved piercing my body with nearly 1,000 needles, temporarily creating acupuncture points throughout my body. I had been born with a unique condition. I possessed no meridians at all. Because of my extraordinary talent, the old master refused to let another faction steal me away. To ensure my loyalty, he secretly placed a poisonous goo inside my ear. As soon as the ritual ended, he proudly declared that I was no longer a mere horse handler, but a true member of the Tang clan, the greatest family in Sichuan. However, the moment I stepped out of the residence, the poisonous goo crawled into my hand. Without hesitation, I crushed it. What the old man didn't know was that I wasn't originally from this world. I came here with a system, and it all began inside a virtual reality game I loved to play. At that moment, the leaders of the top sects had gathered at the once prestigious Manhwa sect. The scene before them left everyone stunned. Corpses covered the battlefield, and the air was thick with the scent of blood. This was the work of a demon, one of them shouted. Just then, they noticed someone approaching, a lone survivor, drenched in blood. The sect has been wiped out. The group quickly recognized him as the famous Plum Blossom swordsman. Trembling, he revealed that the massacre had been carried out by a single man. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted. The sect leaders instinctively raised their arms to shield their eyes, but it was already too late. A massive explosion shook the mountain. When the smoke cleared, one of the leaders watched in horror as the Plum Blossom swordsman was cut down like a chicken. "Show yourself," he roared. I casually stepped forward, carrying a severed head as a souvenir. Looking around, I noticed all the prey that had gathered before me. Shaolin, Wudong, Qingcheng, Namgong, and many others. It was quite an impressive lineup for just one man, me. An old master stepped forward and demanded to know why I had committed such atrocities. With a disappointed sigh, I replied, "I came here because I heard Manhwa was the strongest sect in Murim." Then I tossed the severed head toward them. "It belonged to the Manhwa sect leader, so the rumors were true," I continued. "But seeing all of you gathered here, perhaps you're stronger than Manhwa after all." "Enough," one of the elders shouted. The leaders of every sect were consumed by rage. It was amusing to think that killing me would somehow bring peace to all the people they had failed to protect. Without another word, they charged at me, unleashing their most powerful techniques. Honestly, this place was amazing. I was having the time of my life. As countless attacks converged on my position, I suddenly pulled the VR capsule from my head and returned to reality. Even for me, that combined attack had been too much to handle. Looking down at the game case, I saw the title once again, Murim Online, a newly developed virtual reality Murim game famous for its extreme realism and gratuitous violence. Severed limbs, decapitations, and brutal combat were common sights. The game had become flooded with complaints from players and parents alike, many demanding that it be shut down. Yet despite all the controversy, it remained the most immersive Murim game ever created. For me, there wasn't a game better than this. As I sat there, a news broadcast was playing in the background. Apparently, one of the city's top businessmen had gone missing. Hearing that, I couldn't help but wonder if someone had finally decided to assassinate him. Then a voice suddenly came from behind me. "Please, help me." "Ah, right." I almost forgot. Picking up one of my favorite tools, I casually walked toward the helpless man. It turned out he was the same guy who had been reported missing on the news. Resting my hammer on my shoulder, I smiled and asked, "So, you want me to help you?" The guy immediately started stammering. I don't know why you kidnapped me, but I didn't do anything wrong." Without saying a word, I tossed the evidence right into his face. The moment he saw it, he froze. His expression instantly changed as he wondered where I had gotten all those souvenirs. I looked down at him and said, "If you hadn't done those things, you wouldn't have become my prey." The guy immediately switched into full repentance mode. "I've changed. I'm sorry. I've repented." Hearing those words come out of his mouth made me sick. I grabbed him by the face. I didn't care about his excuses. People like him always followed the same routine. Suddenly, he spotted a tiny opportunity and attacked. Pushing me away, he used the brief opening to break free. The idiot even grabbed my weapon. Then he spun around dramatically like the hero of some action movie. Man, the look on his face was hilarious. I had never seen one of my prey fight back with so much confidence. With all his strength, he charged at me. I casually dodged. The look in his eyes practically screamed, "What the hell did he just do?" Before he could react, my fist slammed straight into his liver. His face twisted in agony, but I wasn't finished. My knee crashed into his face, sending him flying across the room. The fight was over in seconds. After hitting the floor, he rolled over and immediately decided that running away was his best option. Naturally, humans are herbivores, but among them exists a minority of carnivores people who hunt exploit, and devour those weaker than themselves. And that's where I come in. As he glanced back, he finally understood what he was about to become. I was the predator that hunted those carnivores. A hunter. The man desperately shouted for me to stay away. Unfortunately for him, I was just starting to have fun. Then suddenly, bang! The door burst open. Apparently, the police had finally tracked down my location. The officer leading them stepped forward and began listing all my charges before announcing that I was under arrest for the things I had done. Honestly, it was impressive. I couldn't believe they had actually managed to find me. Then the officer fired a warning shot, probably expecting me to flinch. Instead, I felt excited. For some reason, the situation felt exactly like my favorite game. The thrill running through my body only grew stronger. I pointed at the man lying on the floor. "Are you aware that this fat pig murdered 6 women?" The officers remained silent. "He tortured them, took pictures while enjoying himself, then killed them." Pointing toward my collection of souvenirs, I continued. "All of them are the same, birds of a feather. They're carnivores who prey on ordinary people, and I'm just a hunter who preys on them." The one they should have been pointing their bullets at was already lying on the floor. The officer's response was predictable. He called me a psychopath who went around killing people. I exhaled. Talking to a cop was pointless. I had always known that. I gripped my hammer. The officer screamed for me to stop. I swung it clean into the man's face. The officers opened fire. In that moment, one thought crossed my mind. If I were given another life, I hoped it would be filled with beasts worth killing. Somewhere I could hunt freely and still feel satisfied. Yeah, somewhere like Murim. Scenes from the past flashed before my eyes like a revolving lantern. When I came to, I was somehow still alive. The man called me tough, said I had survived something that should have finished me off. But the moment he looked into my eyes and saw nothing but a dead, hollow stare, his mood shifted instantly. Whatever goodwill he had evaporated on the spot. He cursed me as an ungrateful brat, reminded me how much trouble it had cost him to drag me back from the street, and promised me that tomorrow I would not be so lucky. Having been beaten for absolutely no reason, my anger flared immediately. I watched his retreating back, picked up a stone from the ground, and was fully prepared to rush at him and make him regret every word. But the moment I pushed myself upright, my entire skeleton let out a chorus of protests, and my limbs refused outright to cooperate. The next second, I crashed heavily back to the ground. That was when I noticed my arms. They were thin, impossibly thin. Something was wrong. I pulled open my clothes and confirmed it. This body was not mine. I turned wearily toward the door, trying to get my bearings. Then I saw it and froze. The scene outside was achingly familiar. It cut straight to the bone. It was the martial world I had longed for, the one I had chased even in my dreams. I could hardly believe that my wish had been fulfilled in this particular, deeply inconvenient way. A system prompt welcomed me by name to Murim Online, a world where the strong reign supreme. After a while I was cleaning the horse stable with the rake, a man burst through the door, shouting my name. Wakdongo called him out mid-core and ordered him to drop everything immediately. When Sawsum pointed out that he had not yet finished cleaning the stable, a heavy hand clamped over his mouth before he could get another word out. He was reminded bluntly that he was nothing but an orphan the Damley family had picked up off the ground and told not to get full of himself just because someone had shown him a crumb of kindness. Moments later, I found myself being dragged to the blacksmith's shop, while Dongo's companion Makiel conveniently peeled off toward the inn to enjoy himself. When the shop owner saw that only the 2 of us had arrived, his concern was immediate. Dongo assured him cheerfully that Sawsum alone was more than enough for the job, that he was like a fine horse with no limits on what he could carry. With that settled entirely to his own satisfaction, Dongo turned around and strolled off to join Machiel, leaving me with the full load and a shop owner who watched the whole exchange with visible guilt but said nothing. There was nothing to be done. This was a world where the weak existed to be used by the strong. Even so, I understood one thing clearly. Even if I fell, even if the road ahead was packed wall to wall with thorns, I still had to crawl forward to the end. But fate had never once cared about any of that. By the time I finished the day's work, my body had been pushed past the edge of exhaustion. I walked the road back like a corpse that had simply forgotten to lie down, moving without thought, without feeling, without much dignity. Then, without warning, I walked straight into what felt like a mountain and immediately apologized for it. The only response he got was a heavy punch. In the moments that followed, a question turned itself over slowly in Sawsum's mind. Where exactly had it all gone wrong? Was it the day he knocked on the Damley family's gate just to survive? Was it when the typhoon swallowed his family whole and left him as the only one standing? Or had it started even earlier? Then I woke up in the stable, my entire body aching with pain. I hurried to check my reflection and immediately realized that the owner of this body was named Sawsum. As memories flooded my mind, I looked around and recognized the place. According to the body's memories, this was the horse stable where Sawsum worked. The real Sosum had already been beaten to death. What remained was me, Dong Bongsu, occupying the shell he had left behind. It was then, out of the corner of my eye, that I caught sight of something strange. The system window of Murim Online was floating right there in front of me. Over the days that followed, my injuries were bad enough that Makiel took it upon himself to bring food each day. He was not happy about it. He muttered to himself the entire time about how he had done nothing wrong, how after finishing work he should have simply gone home like a sensible person, how instead he had the misfortune of crossing paths with the ill-tempered Pang Derang, and how he was now the one stuck cleaning up that man's mess. He even entertained the thought of finishing me off himself before quickly talking himself out of it on the grounds that losing his own head over it was simply not worth the trouble. Full of grievances he had nowhere to put, he kicked open the stable door, threw today's food onto the ground in front of me without a word, and left without looking back. 2 weeks had passed since I arrived in this body. From what Makiel let slip and from everything I had quietly pieced together on my own, I knew that the people here used Chinese characters. But this was not Earth. Martial arts genuinely existed here, not as metaphor, not as tradition, but as raw, physical power of the kind that only ever appeared in movies and novels back home. People moved through the air at speeds the naked eye could barely follow. The legendary feats I had only ever read about were simply Tuesday here. It was, in every practical sense, a living, breathing version of Murim Online. And then there was the system window, a game-like status bar that floated in my field of vision and was completely invisible to everyone else. At first I had assumed this was a game world, but after watching the people around me for several days, I became certain it was not. Every person I encountered had their own consciousness, their own weight, their own unmistakable sense of being fully alive. This was the real world, which raised a question I could not quite shake. If this place was real, then what exactly was I? A human being or a player? I was still turning that over in my mind when Guokdongo stepped through the doorway. He launched immediately into a cheerful monologue, announcing that some poor fool had gotten himself beaten half to death on account of an idiot, and had only just been released, and that he himself had been thinking about me the entire time. I stood up slowly, picked up today's dinner, and swallowed it in a single go. He called me a little bastard, demanded to know whether I had heard a single word he said, and suggested that I appeared to have a genuine death wish. I met the threat with nothing but cold eyes. Then I smashed the porcelain bowl in my hand against the ground, picked up the sharpest shard I could find, and drove it straight into Guokdongo's neck. I looked at him without flinching and told him plainly that the person he used to know had already been killed by all of them long ago. Then I raised the shard again and did not stop. Whatever line existed between clarity and madness, I had crossed it completely. The sounds of tearing flesh and my own laughter wound around each other until I could no longer tell them apart. The whole world seemed to bleed red. Scalding drops fell like rain. Whether I was human or player no longer mattered. I was certain of only one thing. This place was real. This world operated exactly like the game. The weak existed to be consumed, and the strong took everything. And now, at last, I no longer had any reason to hide what I actually was. I was going to hunt here to my heart's content. This place was going to become a paradise for someone like me. And so, with that, I completed my first kill after crossing over. Practically speaking, someone like Guokdongo had very little value as prey, but there was still something I needed to confirm. The system inventory was behaving differently from what I remembered. In Murim Online, the inventory had been a clean grid where each slot held exactly one type of item. What I was looking at now was something else entirely, a chaotic, borderless interface. And when I reached my hand toward it, my hand passed straight through. The space inside was enormous, hundreds of square meters at the very least. If this system worked the same way as it had in the game, then all I needed to do was touch whatever I wanted to store and simply will it inside. I tested the theory. Guokdongo's corpse dissolved into streams of data on the spot and was pulled cleanly into the system space before I had time to finish the thought. I stared at what remained, which was nothing. A man that size, gone just like that. The function was almost embarrassingly useful. Then another thought arrived. Uninvited and immediately interesting. If it worked on a corpse, could it work on something still living? I filed that away for the first available opportunity. Several days passed. My injuries had mostly healed. To avoid drawing any suspicion, I had taken to pretending I was mute, keeping my head down and quietly observing everything around me. Then Mikiel's hand came down hard across the back of my head without warning. Mikiel grabbed me by the collar and announced that he'd heard I had gone mute, apparently to avoid exposing myself. I stared back at him with the most vacant expression I could manage. He shoved me off and told me to stop loafing around and take the horse out for a walk. I bowed to show I understood. He cursed under his breath the entire time, muttering about what exactly one was supposed to do with an idiot who could not even hold a conversation. Out on the street, I led the horse along and quietly took in the old-fashioned scenery around me. Then, from around a corner, several small figures appeared with rocks already in hand. A group of children, apparently with nothing better to do, had decided that pelting me was a reasonable way to spend the afternoon. They laughed and announced that Big Idiot Sosum had upgraded to Mute Idiot Sosum. Something shifted in my expression. The chubby boy at the front blinked and rubbed his eyes, convinced he was imagining things. When he looked again, I had already rearranged my face back into its usual vacant mask. I mumbled a few meaningless sounds and turned to walk away. He took that as surrender and immediately became insufferable about it, jeering at my back the whole way down the street. Sosum was a mute. Sosum was an idiot. Sosum was an idiot. Sosum could not do anything. He was not entirely wrong. Not yet, anyway. Meanwhile, McKeel arrived at the entrance to the weapons storeroom, still grumbling loudly about being made to sort weapons by himself and wondering where on earth Guakdongo had disappeared to for the past 2 days. Then I stepped out of the storeroom and he stopped mid-sentence. Every weapon inside had been arranged with neat, deliberate order. He stared at it for a moment, then looked at me, then looked back at the storeroom. He asked if I had finished all his work. I nodded and bowed and made a sufficiently fawning display of myself. He shook his head and remarked with something approaching genuine surprise that apparently dying once had done wonders for my intelligence. Then I produced a small cloth pouch and held it out, indicating it was a tribute and that it was for him. He opened it and went very still. It was full of copper coins. His entire demeanor transformed on the spot. He told me I had handled things well, that I finally understood how the world worked, and that from this point forward, Guakdongo would never dare lay a hand on me again. Then he pocketed the money and walked away, grinning like a man who had just discovered a very convenient golden goose. The vacant look on my face dissolved the moment his back was turned. Coins in hand and spirits high, McKeel made straight for the Phoenix Inn, already planning exactly how to spend his unexpected windfall. The owner greeted him warmly and moved to call for his usual company. Machiel waved that off and announced that tonight he was not settling for second best. He wanted Chosian, the establishment's top courtesan. The owner's smile. He knew perfectly well that Machiel was not normally the type to afford such things, but the pouch of copper coins settled the matter instantly, and the smile returned in full as he led Machiel through to a private room. Machiel settled in and waited with the particular excitement of a man who felt he had genuinely earned something. Before long, the door opened and a stunning woman stepped inside. He thought to himself that she was more than 100 times prettier than his usual choice and congratulated himself thoroughly on the upgrade. What he did not know, could not have known, was that in the gap between the wooden boards directly behind him, a pair of eyes were watching the room with cold, unblinking focus. Those eyes belonged to me. Back a little earlier, the inn's owner had watched Machiel disappear through the front door, looked down at the coins in his own hand, and allowed himself a quiet, satisfied smile. Then the door opened, and someone walked in. The person who walked into the Phoenix Inn was me. The owner looked me over and demanded to know what a mute was doing in a place like this, and suggested firmly that I leave immediately before he could finish the thought. He did not get the chance. I held out a money pouch and, with considerable effort, forced out 4 words through my manufactured speech impediment. Miss Engang. Tonight. He opened the pouch. When he saw how full it was, his pupils widened, and his entire attitude reorganized itself in under a second. He smiled warmly, directed me to the second floor, and assured me that Engang would be up shortly. And just like that, I too was a guest of the Phoenix Inn. When he had finished thoroughly celebrating himself, I slipped silently through from the neighboring room, brought the bandage in my hand toward him with great care, and in one smooth motion looped it around his neck and pulled both ends hard. He reacted immediately, cursing and thrashing with everything he had. My grip did not loosen by a fraction. In a final desperate bid, he gathered the last of his strength and threw himself backward, slamming his full weight down and taking me to the ground beneath him. I held on. Tonight, it was one of us or the other, and I had already decided which. As I gradually increased the pressure, his whole body began to convulse. Those lively, self-satisfied eyes rolled slowly white. I noted with genuine appreciation how remarkable it was to feel a life departing bit by bit directly through one's own hands. My gaze moved to the woman beside him, who had slept through the entire thing without stirring once. I walked over, looked down at her for a moment, and determined immediately that she posed no threat whatsoever. Satisfied, I turned and made my way back toward the wooden board I had entered through. The passage had not always been there. I had made it myself using the system inventory, touching the board and willing it into storage, leaving a gap exactly large enough to be useful. Another application of the system I had not anticipated and was already filing away for future reference. 2 kills now, and both times my experience points had climbed afterward. The confirmation settled something I had been turning over in my mind. This world rewarded killing exactly the way the game had. Hunt, gain experience, level up, grow stronger, and the stronger I became, the more efficiently I could hunt and the faster I would grow. A perfectly self-sustaining system. Then I paused, looked down at my prize, and held up my fingers like a camera. It was disappointing not having a real one to capture proof of my kill. Downstairs, the owner had finally intercepted Gang outside her door and was hurrying her along without much patience. He reminded her that the guest had paid and that, mute or not, she was expected to do her job properly. Then, almost as an afterthought, he noticed that Makil and Chojin had been conspicuously quiet for a very long time. He knocked on Makil's door and called through it, suggesting that things had gone on long enough and that Chojin ought to be finishing up now. Silence. He knocked again. Still nothing. He was just drawing breath. The scream that came out of that room belonged to Chojin. The owner shoved the door open and rushed inside. What he found was Chojin huddled in a quilt in the corner, staring upward in pure terror. He followed her gaze and his legs gave out beneath him entirely. The spirited, swaggering Mashiel, who had strutted into his inn not long ago, had somehow managed to hang himself in the middle of a private room. The region of Manhwa had always been prosperous. Its fertile land and interconnected lakes had kept commerce flowing for generations, drawing merchants and traders from every direction. But wealth, as it always does, also drew bandits and men of worse character still. To maintain any semblance of order, powerful clans had risen throughout the region over the centuries. The most prominent among them were the Namung clan, acknowledged as the foremost family in Enwei, and the Danri clan, not counted among the 5 great families, but still regarded as a top-tier noble house across the Central Plains. The Danri family was particularly known for 2 things: their exclusive military force, the Cross-Heavenly Sword Legion, and their intelligence and enforcement unit, the Black Crow Squad. Both had reputations that stretched far beyond the borders of Manhwa. It was the Black Crow Squad that now found itself dealing with something it had no clean answer for. The suicides had been mounting steadily, over 100 that month alone, all of them apparently genuine, all of them leaving behind no evidence of anything other than a person who had simply decided to stop living. There had always been the occasional suicide, 1 or 2 a month at most. Nothing like this. Chief Gidio listened to the reports and then asked one pointed question: who was the first? When he learned it was Makil of the Danri family, killed, or rather, apparently self-killed, while enjoying an evening at the Phoenix Inn in Geo. Then he stood up, stretching as he said he needed to see it for himself. Upon arriving at the Phoenix Inn, he asked the innkeeper, "Is this the room?" The man from earlier nodded. "Yes, this is where I found Machil's corpse." If this plague of suicides was in fact a string of murders, then the first question was simple: how had the killer entered and exited without leaving a trace? The investigator Geo worked through every possibility methodically. Every conventional entrance and exit could be ruled out. That left only the wall. If the wooden boards had been removed, a passage would indeed have been possible, but there was not a single mark on them. To remove boards cleanly without leaving evidence, one would theoretically need to lift the entire roof first. The idea was absurd. Which left, again, only the conclusion everyone was trying to avoid. Gio paused and asked whether anyone had occupied the room next door on the night Makil died. The answer came back promptly. Yes, someone had arrived at roughly the same time as Makil. It was a servant of the Danri family itself. While all of that was unfolding across town, I was still leading a horse through the streets as though nothing in the world concerned me. The experience bar was nearly full. I had been productive. I had also noticed something useful. The stronger the target, the more experience they yielded. The problem was that in my current state, I was still no match for any genuine martial artist, which meant I needed to be selective about my next move. A voice called out from the entrance of an alley that nobody had seen me in a few days, and that I seemed to have gotten considerably more handsome. A group of street thugs lounged at the alley mouth, grinning. Their leader suggested I come over and greet my big brothers properly. It genuinely surprised me that even as a lowly Danri servant, Sosum had apparently still been considered fair game by trash of this caliber. The bar for this world's predators was lower than I had appreciated. The leader grew tired of waiting for a reaction and grabbed me by the hair, announcing that we were going somewhere quiet for a nice little chat. He dragged me into the alley without further ceremony. I spent the walk calculating. There were too many of them for a clean kill. Exposure was likely, and the experience gained would barely be worth the effort. The sensible approach was to absorb a few hits, let the situation stabilize, and deal with them at a more convenient time. Then a voice cut through the alley from the shadows, and the entire scene went still. The voice told the thugs that was enough and reminded them that the instruction had been to invite me over, not to start something in the street. When the gang leader recognized who had spoken, he began trembling immediately. The man who stepped forward was Django. He ignored the thugs entirely and walked straight toward the horse behind me, looking it over with obvious appreciation. He explained that the Black Snake Guild's leader had a particular obsession with fine horses, and that he intended to present this one as a gift. Then he asked, with the tone of someone who considered the matter already settled, what I thought about that. I felt the killing intent coming off him from the moment he opened his mouth. He had come to take the horse and leave no witness behind. He had simply made the mistake of choosing the wrong person to practice that on, When I still did not move, his expression went cold. He said he would not repeat himself. I told him to drop the performance. If he wanted the horse, he was welcome to come and kill me for it. Then I swung my fist directly at his head and pulled a dagger from the system space in the same motion. To everyone watching, a blade had simply materialized in my hand from nothing. Django's composure collapsed instantly. It was the last expression he ever wore. The dagger found his neck with complete precision. The next moment, light exploded from my body in every direction. A system prompt announced with its usual pleasant indifference that I had reached level 2. One of them screamed that it was sorcery. Cold sweat soaked through him on the spot. Something was rising from the brightness like a shadow climbing out of an abyss. He did not stop to name it. He turned and ran along with every other man in that alley, driven by the singular and very reasonable conviction that if he did not reach the sunlight at the end of the street, he would not survive the next few seconds. He almost made it. His calf was taken off cleanly from behind and he hit the ground hard. Lying there with the light just ahead of him, he found himself circling the same thought over and over. Sosim had been nothing, a coward, a grinning, hollow-eyed fool who absorbed beatings without complaint and never once pushed back. How had that creature become this? How was this the same person? He could not accept it. Unfortunately for him, reality had never once asked for anyone's acceptance. His last conscious thought was that he was going to die at the hands of something that ugly. When he opened his eyes again, he was somehow still alive. I crouched over him and remarked, without particular warmth, that he had woken up impressively fast. Then I pressed a dagger against his neck and laid out the terms simply. One question for me, one answer from him. Anything beyond that was noise. The question was, who was Django? Django had been a cadre of the Black Snake Guild, one of the gang forces that controlled the backstreets of Phoenix. The guild's leader was a man named Bang Po, and it had been Bang Po who ordered Django to kill for the horse. The bald man finished by pointing out that he himself was nothing but a low-level errand runner and begging with considerable desperation to be let go. I told him that if he shared everything he knew about the Black Snake Guild and the information proved useful, I would spare his life. Hope lit up in his eyes immediately. He told me everything. In the end, it made no difference. I touched him lightly and he dissolved into particles of light and was drawn into the system space. I cleaned away every remaining trace and the alley returned to silence. I stood there and organized what I had learned. Gangsters occupied exactly the right position, suspended between genuine martial artists and ordinary people, strong enough to yield meaningful experience. Better prey than I had expected to find this quickly. I filed that away as a significant advantage going forward. The level up had also healed every wound on my body completely. If damage to ordinary tissue restored itself on leveling up, it was reasonable to assume even critical injuries, heart, brain, might do the same. Which brought me to the one flaw I had already identified, the light. The flash that erupted from my body on leveling up. A hunter who wanted to move freely among prey had to be indistinguishable from the crowd around him. The moment I stood out, I became a target rather than a predator. From this point forward, leveling up would happen only at the precise moment a hunt concluded, or exclusively in the presence of prey who would not survive to report what they had seen. The mute act alone was no longer sufficient cover. I needed to grow stronger, and I needed to do it without anyone noticing. With that settled, I led the horse out of the alley, stepped back into the flow of people on the street, and let the crowd close around me. Back at the stable, the system produced something unexpected. An error message, floating quietly in my field of vision. I studied it for a long moment. The cause was likely something internal, something particular to this body or this situation. Whatever had triggered it, the effect was immediate and interesting. Attributes that had previously shown only question marks converted themselves into readable progress bars. Curious, I opened the skill panel beneath them. An entire row of skills filled my vision. Slash, thrust, guard, throw, and something I had not seen before, Spirit Eye. The first 4 were standard passive defaults from Murim Online. Spirit Eye was not. I was still reading through its listed effects when the system cut across my attention with a new prompt entirely. An enemy more than 10 levels above me had entered within a 20-meter radius, and that radius was shrinking. I stared at that line for a moment. So the system had a warning function. Something dangerous was approaching me right now, moving slowly and deliberately. That ruled out an intruder. No one breaking into Danry family grounds would move at that pace, which meant the person approaching was almost certainly an expert from within the family itself. The gap between my current level and theirs was something I needed to think about carefully. Reaching level 2 had already cost me considerably. To reach level 10 through ordinary kills alone would likely require thousands of deaths, possibly tens of thousands. A martial artist sitting 10 levels above me would not be a common sight even within a family like the Danry. Whatever was coming toward me right now, I was in absolutely no condition to face it directly. The door door swung open. The Black Crow squad chief walked in with his subordinates at his back. I arranged my face into an expression of genuine shock and held it there. I could not afford a single slip. He looked at me directly and asked if I was Sosum. Then he asked, just as directly, whether I had killed Michiel. I let terror do the work for me. I babbled, gestured frantically, and made every effort to communicate. Gio was not satisfied with that. Without warning, he pressed his palm against me and drove a surge of concentrated true energy directly into my body. I felt it tear through me like something feral, rampaging in every direction before converging violently on a single point, and then disappearing entirely, swallowed without a trace as though it had never existed. He probed for a moment longer, then withdrew his hand and exhaled quietly. He said he had been mistaken, turned around, and walked out. I watched their backs recede into the darkness and said nothing. Outside, one of his subordinates pressed him on it, asked why they were leaving, why there would be no formal interrogation when he had clearly been suspicious. Gio explained, without breaking stride. He had injected his energy into the body to investigate. Anyone who had practiced even the most basic martial arts would leave internal traces behind. The result had been completely empty, nothing at all. As far as he could determine, I was an ordinary person who had never trained a day in my life. From that day, the suicide plague vanished as abruptly as it had appeared. What replaced it was considerably louder. As night fell and rain poured over the city, a nearby tavern was packed with people. Inside, the atmosphere was lively. One drunkard slammed his cup onto the floor and asked his companion if he had heard the story. The nameless hero? His friend replied, "Of course, there's no one who hasn't heard of him." The drunkard immediately shook his head. "Add Lord to the name," he shouted proudly. "Lord Nameless Hero." Raising another drink, he laughed. He slaughtered those filthy unorthodox factions. His friend quickly told him to calm down, but the drunkard refused. Those so-called mighty unorthodox factions have all been wiped out. His companion reminded him that one faction still remained. "They're next," the drunkard declared. "They'll be crushed soon enough." While the two continued their conversation, a figure wearing a cloak that concealed his face quietly left the tavern. As he walked through the dark alleys, he remained unaware that a spy was secretly following him. A few moments later, he arrived at the last remaining hideout. The Black Snake Guild had clearly been paying attention. Panic had already taken root inside their walls. Word had reached them that 3 gangs were already gone. The order had gone out to stay sharp and stop slacking. The man giving that order lost the person standing next to him before he finished the sentence. His companion's head left his shoulders with no warning at all. He reached for his sword. I was already behind him. One clean slash and I told him to go keep his friend company. Then I pushed the guild gates open and walked inside without slowing down. I was still wondering where everyone had gone when the sky darkened above me and a rain of arrows came down all at once. I threw myself backward and cleared them, then looked up toward where they had come from. From beneath the walls, Black Snake Guild members poured out in a dense mass. They had laid the trap well in advance and had simply been waiting for me to walk into it, which, to be fair, I had done without hesitation. Then the entire area fell silent. The moment thunder roared across the sky, the signal was given. The order to take my life had been issued, and the entire mass of them surged forward at once. Others launched themselves into the air from multiple angles simultaneously. I gripped the hilt and let the force build through the scabbard. The 3 forces sword art released in a single sweep, and the flash of sword light that followed cut clean through the first wave. The ones behind them stopped dead and stared, and by the time the thought of running formed itself into anything actionable, it was already far too late. The blade did not stop. It moved like wind through the crowd, and men dropped one after another. From somewhere in the distance, an elite fighter, split with rage, ordered everyone else out of his way and came at me with a spear. I grabbed the nearest man by the wrist, twisted, and used the momentum to launch him directly into the elite's path. Before either of them could adjust, my blade was already in position. One thrust put them both on the same sword. Then a blade came down at my back without warning. The scar-faced man had slipped behind me and was already committed to the strike. I moved to counter but found my sword seized firmly by the thug beside me. With no time and no angle, I reached into the system space and drove a flash of sword light out from behind me directly. In his final moments, he couldn't understand where the knife had come from. While my focus was elsewhere, one of the thugs launched a surprise attack, driving a blade into my back. As I fell to the ground, he smirched triumphantly. I finally landed a hit. After watching me tear through his men, he had started to believe I was some kind of monster, but now he realized the truth. I was human, and more importantly, I was a human that could be killed. I slowly pulled the knife from my body and tossed aside the hat I was wearing. Everyone froze in shock, because instead of fear or pain, I was smiling, a grin filled with pure joy. I smiled and walked back into the crowd. In a thatched hut near the exit beneath the city wall, Several men crouched in the shadows and watched the battle from a distance. The screaming had grown noticeably sparse, that it sounded very much like he had killed everyone by himself. Another one complained bitterly that their guild had only ever done a bit of extortion and some light human trafficking, that there were far worse people operating openly across Phoenix, and that it was deeply unfair to be singled out simply for being convenient targets. The more practical concern was that they could not let me reach the back. The guild leader was in the manor and that door had to hold. Then a silhouette appeared at the tower gate. The order went out immediately, and arrows flooded the thatched hut from every direction, all of them converging on that dark shape in the entrance. The man craned his neck to check whether the target had gone down. The archer directly behind him lost his head, then the next one, then the one after that. One by one, in complete silence, the men inside the hut were beheaded in sequence, as though death itself were working methodically through a list. The man stood in the middle of it, paralyzed with terror, watching his people fall around him without any visible cause. He called out into the darkness, demanding I show myself, asking what I wanted and why I was doing this, and finishing with the assessment that I was nothing but a devil. He did not get to finish the sentence. His head left his shoulders cleanly. I told the empty room that there was only one thing I had ever wanted from any of them: their lives. The Blacksnake Guild grounds were carpeted with bodies by the time I reached the brightly lit manor at the far end. The last man standing was Bang Po himself, the guild leader. I reflected briefly on the progression. The White Tiger Gang had come first. I had killed Zhang Hu there and leveled up as a direct result. But measured against what a truly powerful opponent would represent, every gain I had made so far was still embarrassingly modest. To keep the momentum going, I had resorted to every method available to me, luring enemies deep before striking from behind, setting fire directly to their camps and letting the chaos do half the work. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, the retreat had already been cut off. More than half the White Tiger Gang had been dismantled. The common people, watching the gangs of Phoenix fall one by one without any clear explanation, had decided there must be a hero behind it, and had named him accordingly. The Nameless Hero. I found the title genuinely useful. It gave me a clean public mask to operate behind and made the work considerably easier. If they wanted a hero, I was content to borrow the costume. By the time I cut down the White Tiger Gang's leader, I had reached level 5 and acquired 2 new skills, Lightness Technique and the 3 Forces Sword Art. For the first time, I had enough raw strength to confront gangs head-on rather than from the shadows. The arithmetic of Phoenix's underworld had shifted accordingly, and now only one gang remained, the Black Snake Guild. In the deepest part of the guild, an old man sat quietly at the entrance of the manor, as though he had been expecting company. Lightning split the sky behind me as I fought my way through to where he waited. Bang Po studied me for a moment and asked if I was the Nameless Hero. I said nothing, then asked why I was wrapped so tightly. I said because I was not. The old man frowned. Then why were you hunting the unorthodox factions? I smiled. Because I was never the righteous swordsman everyone believed me to be. The old man paused for a moment before bursting into laughter. So you deceived everyone? I shook my head. I never deceived anyone. They simply chose to believe what they wanted. His laughter grew louder. Interesting. Slowly he picked up his blade. He knew that before the day was over, he would cross the river of death. Yet as he looked at me, his face was filled with joy rather than regret. Drawing his sword, he pointed it in my direction. Come. His eyes burned with fighting spirit. Let us see which of us reaches the end first. I released the killing intent I had been keeping contained and let it fill the space between us. The 2 forces met head-on, and for a few exchanges we were even. Then the gap began to show itself. Bang Po was reading my patterns faster than I could adjust them, and found an opening in my defense. His sword came at my arm. I had miscalculated the distance by a fraction, and the blade opened a long, bloody gash across it before I could pull back. I retreated immediately and forced space between us. He told me, with calm satisfaction, that my body was already in poor condition and that challenging him in that state was my greatest mistake. Then he came at me like a man with nothing to lose, targeting the wound again and again. At this rate, the injury would compound itself into something unmanageable. I needed a different approach, and I needed it immediately. While I was lost in thought, he found another opening. I moved quickly into the 3 Forces Sword Art, but I had walked straight into his trap. His sword moved like a whip, fluid and deceptive. I raised my hand and sliced it off. He smirked. First time facing a whip technique, I smiled back. That surprised him. I activated the Lightness Technique through sheer will, drove a kick into Bang Po's abdomen with everything I had, and sent him crashing through the wall of the building beside us. I allowed myself precisely 1 second to think I might have a moment to breathe. Then the ground split open and countless black serpent phantoms rose from it in every direction. Bang Po's voice came through it slowly and deliberately. Bang Po told me that I had genuinely surprised him. My fighting style was not that of a warrior. It was that of an assassin, a hunter. He said I should remember that in a duel between martial artists, the more trump cards kept hidden, the longer one survived. Then he pointed out with complete calm that he had more hidden cards than I did. That was why I would lose. He swung the giant serpent phantom forward as he said it. He announced that it was time to end the nameless, murderous madman and told me to die, its fangs spreading wide as it dropped toward me. In the instant before it landed, I drove every ounce of force I had into my right foot. Dust exploded upward in a dense cloud and swallowed the space around me whole. Bang Po said dryly that throwing up dust to blind an old man's eyes was not going to save me from his attack. Then a light appeared inside the cloud and he drove everything he had directly at it. He announced that he had finally caught me. Then he saw what he had actually hit and his eyes went wide. It was the corpse of one of his own underlings. He cursed and demanded to know where my real body had gone. I was already above him. The three forces sword art, second form, aimed straight for the killing point. The blade came down from altitude directly at Bang Po's heart with everything behind it. He caught it in his bare palm. I noted with genuine, if irritated respect, that only an old veteran with decades of instinct behind him could make that particular judgment in that fraction of a second. Whatever composure Bang Po had been maintaining dissolved entirely at that point. He whipped his weapon around and reversed the blade's direction in one savage motion, driving it straight back at me. I moved to retreat and found my sword seized in his grip. Out of options, I reached into the system space and began pulling corpses out directly in front of him, and Bang Po, startled beyond reason, slashed wildly in every direction until he had hacked every last one of them to pieces. He stood there forcing his own breathing under control, sweeping his gaze across the empty grounds in search of me. There was no one. He screamed into the darkness that I was a lunatic, that I had no respect even for the dead, and demanded I show myself. An arrow came through the air and he raised his sword to deflect it. Then another arrow grazed the bridge of his nose from behind. The realization arrived quietly but completely. He was no longer the predator in this exchange. He was the prey. A black shadow flickered across his vision, and he lashed out with the snake whip without thinking. He caught it. He announced it with triumph. Then he saw what it actually was. A severed arm. The coldness came from behind him before he could process that. Then the actual blade, punching clean through his chest from the back. Bang Po had never genuinely believed, at any point in the evening, that he would be the one to lose. And yet, the last gang in Phoenix had just been annihilated. With his last breath, Bang Po asked me one thing. He wanted to know, before he died, what my reason was for all of it. I told him there did not need to be one. Humans had been slaughtering each other since before they could walk upright, and building civilization had done nothing to change that fundamental truth. Even here in the martial world, the same law held without exception. The weak were consumed, and the strong took everything. The only difference now was that the strong one was me. Phoenix's gangs were finished. It was time to move to the next stage, somewhere stronger, somewhere with better prey. Deep within a distant mountain range, a powerful sect held an emergency meeting inside its main hall. The leader at the center asked how much time remained before the Orthodox demonic war. One of the subordinates answered, 2 years. Hearing that, the figure ordered them to set the grand plan in motion, then called for Guanwun to execute the first stratagem. Back in Phoenix, the streets had already caught fire with the news. I was out walking the horse as usual when the conversations around me made clear that word of the gang's annihilation had spread to every corner of the city. People were revising the title upward. Nameless Hero no longer felt sufficient, and Great Hero was gaining ground quickly. The sentiment was straightforward and heartfelt. Without him, the common people would still be ground underfoot by those gangs, and neither the authorities nor any of the so-called righteous sects had ever shown the slightest interest in doing anything about it. One man in green listened to all of this and raised a quiet objection. Even granting that the gangs deserved it, slaughter on that scale, was it really something to celebrate? Nobody particularly wanted to hear that. The response came back blunt and immediate. Those people were scum. The authorities had never cared. The righteous sects had never cared, and when it came down to it, the only person who had ever actually stood up for ordinary people was the nameless hero. The man in green turned it over and found, to his own mild discomfort, that he could not argue with any of that. Before long, one man raised both hands, ran into the street, and started shouting. The other two exchanged a glance and joined in. Within moments, the emotion had spread through the surrounding crowd like a spark hitting dry grass, and wave after wave of cheering filled the streets of Phoenix as people poured out of doorways and alleys to add their voices to it. I walked through the middle of all of it with cold eyes and a horse on a lead rope. It was time to leave. By evening, I had led the horse back to the stable. Then, the system cut across my thoughts with a prompt. An enemy more than 10 levels above me had entered within a 20-meter radius. Spirit Eye activated on its own a fraction of a second later, and I understood immediately that a powerful expert was already inside. I kept my face neutral, raised my hand, and pushed the door open as though I had not noticed a thing. There was more than one person waiting inside. The first face I recognized immediately, Gio, chief of the Black Crow Squad. The other man in the stable was someone of considerably greater significance, Danri Qian-Wu himself, head of the Danri family, known throughout the Central Plains as the Flying Heavenly Demon's Sword. I had no idea why he had come here personally. Danri Qian-Wu reached out and stroked the fine horse. He remarked that the time to part had come. As he said it, I noticed that his feet had risen silently off the ground without any visible effort. He turned to Gio and explained his purpose without ceremony. The second daughter of the Namong family head was to be married on the 15th of the following month. He intended to present the horse as a wedding gift, a gesture toward a larger objective. If he could place one of his children inside the Namong family, whether as a spouse or as a disciple, the strategic value would be considerable. 2 pieces of wood crossed a river more easily than one. He acknowledged that the Namong family might not accept the offer willingly, which was precisely why he had summoned Gio. Whatever means were required, the matter had to be accomplished. The invisible pressure that settled onto Gio's shoulders as those words landed. He gritted his teeth and agreed. Danri Qian-Wu turned his gaze toward me, still kneeling on the ground, and instructed that I be brought along on the journey to attend to his horse. Then he left without another word. The following morning I arrived at the assembly point early and waited. My mind was occupied with one thing only. I needed real martial arts. I had tried imitating the movements of family martial artists and gang fighters during my time in Phoenix, and the results had been exactly what imitation always produced. The worst viable option was to steal a secret manual and teach myself in isolation. The best was to find a true master and become his disciple. Neither was straightforward. Worse, this body was already 18 years old, which in a world where serious martial training typically began in early childhood was practically ancient for a beginner. But this journey presented something. The Namong family was one of the 5 great families of the Central Plains, with power and resources to match. If there was a path toward real martial arts anywhere within reach, it likely ran through them. And beyond the training, stronger prey would be waiting there as well. Gio arrived with his men shortly after and the group assembled. A subordinate reported that the young master and young lady traveling with them had not yet appeared. The young lady, who dislikes traveling with servants, would most likely make her own way and catch up on the road. The young master, Danri Gange, was in all probability still at an inn on Phoenix Street. Gio said nothing, swung onto his horse, and rode toward Phoenix Street at speed. The rest of us followed with the particular energy of people who had no choice in the matter. They found him quickly enough. A loud crash from inside the inn that made Gio close his eyes briefly before he had even dismounted. Danri Gange was the eldest son of Danri Qian-Wu and, by all accounts, shockingly gifted, a natural talent at martial arts of the kind that appeared once in a generation. His character was another matter entirely. Frivolous, fond of wine, and aggressively lacking in self-restraint, the chef paid little attention at first, assuming it was nothing more than an ordinary beating. Then, a massive explosion shook the entire building. His face froze as young Master Damley came crashing through the wall. I activated my spirit eye immediately. A system panel materialized before me. Warning. An enemy with a level difference of 10 is within 20 meters. Even flat on his back after being sent flying, the young master kept hurling insults at his opponent. Then another devastating strike landed on him. The chef stood there with his mouth open. I couldn't help but smile. A true master had appeared, and this one was overwhelmingly powerful. As the mysterious man drove his foot down hard onto the young master, the chief stepped forward and shouted at him to stop. The man looked up, sizing him up with quiet curiosity. Then an overwhelming pressure rolled off him in waves. The chief straightened and introduced himself without flinching. Deo, head of the Damley clan's Black Crow unit, and the person currently under his foot was the young master of the Damley clan. The chief warned him plainly, "Move his foot now or don't blame him for what followed." The Danli warriors immediately readied themselves behind him. That was when it clicked for me. The chief had no idea who this man was. A man unknown even to the head of the Black Crow unit. Someone who knew everything worth knowing about Anhui's Murim. And even with every fighter we had combined, we stood no chance against him. But I wasn't worried. No lion wastes its full strength just to crush a bug. The man tilted his head and casually picked at his ear, as though the name Ji Dayo meant nothing to him, not even something worth stepping on. That pushed the chief past his limit. He called every member of the Black Crow unit forward to rescue the young master. Every warrior raised their weapon in unison. The man simply lifted one finger. Dark energy gathered and pulsed in his hand. Then he released it. Thousands of flying needles erupted outward, striking everyone in an instant, warriors and the chief alike. Every single one took a headshot and went down. In an instant, more than half the remaining fighters were defeated. It was the soul-chasing flying butterfly technique. The old man glanced over and gave a dry remark. For a country laborer, his eyes hadn't completely rotted away yet. Then he introduced himself. Tongwu, the soul-chasing poison hand. Among the 20 greatest experts in existence, the hierarchy was understood by anyone who paid attention. 2 gods, 3 monsters, 5 peaks, and 10 grandmasters. Tongwu, supreme leader of the Sichuan Tong family, held one of those 10 grandmaster positions. Anyone who made an enemy of Tongwu could not escape his poisonous hand even in death. The Danri family was in serious trouble, all of it traceable back to one idiot who had not known when to keep his hands to himself. If this was not resolved carefully, the consequences could reach far beyond a bruised young master and a humiliated squad. The question was how. I was still turning that over rapidly when a young woman stepped out of the inn and told her grandfather that they should leave and not waste any further time arguing with people who had no manners. Tangwu, who had been radiating killing intent not 30 seconds earlier, produced a warm smile the instant he laid eyes on his granddaughter. He agreed that the lesson had been sufficient to give them some understanding of how vast the world actually was. He added more to himself than anyone else, that a successor of a righteous sect who spent his mornings getting drunk and harassing women deserved considerably harsher treatment. He finished with a message for when the young master regained consciousness. If he ever carelessly laid hands on an innocent young woman again, he would not live long enough to die of old age. Gio, still flat on the ground, and managed to express his gratitude for the senior's mercy. Tongwu raised a single finger and gave a casual wave. Every silver needle embedded in every forehead pulled itself free simultaneously, reversed its path through the air and settled neatly back between his fingers. Then he turned to leave and stopped. Something had caught his eye. Across the courtyard, his gaze found mine and held it. He told everyone around him to wait, then walked directly toward me. The moment I understood that I was his actual destination, something cold ran the length of my spine. It was the precise sensation of being locked onto by something that hunted for a living. By the time I pulled myself back to the present, Tongwu was already standing in front of me. He asked my name. It was such a simple question that I froze completely. His expression tightened. He told me his patience had limits and that he would ask one final time. I held his gaze and still said nothing, and was visibly on the verge of erupting entirely when Gio stepped forward quickly and explained that I was a horsekeeper and that I was mute. Then he fixed me with a gaze that moved like a blade through the air between us, and I felt, with complete and uncomfortable certainty, that he was seeing straight through every layer I had constructed. He looked at me the way someone looks at something genuinely rare. My pulse jumped. This was an opportunity, possibly the one I had been waiting for since I arrived in this world. Tengwu's eyes sharpened and he grabbed my arm without further ceremony. A current of green true energy poured into my body. Then, without warning, he burst out laughing. He offered no explanation whatsoever. He simply turned to Gio and confirmed that the group was headed to the Namong family, exchanged a few words to establish that I was nothing more than a lowly horsekeeper in the Danri household, and then stated plainly that he intended to take me with him. Gio pointed out with reasonable concern that without me, there was nobody capable of managing the prized horse safely for the remainder of the journey. Tongwu considered that for approximately 1 second and proposed that they traveled together. Once the Namong family was reached, he would take me from there. If the Danri family had required an explanation, Tongwu would write the letter himself. Jia had clearly wanted to think it through more carefully. Then he made the mistake of meeting Tongwu's eyes, the ones that were currently suggesting that further negotiation would be unwise, and immediately revised his position. He announced smoothly that the original intention had always been to present both the horse and the keeper together to the Namong family anyway. Tongwu nodded, told everyone standing around to stop loitering, and started walking. Gio stood there with the particular expression of a man watching a situation he was nominally in charge of dissolve completely beyond his reach. With no remaining options, he turned and ordered the servants to carry Danri Ganga away for treatment. The group set out immediately and pressed on until nightfall, arriving in grand procession before another inn. Geo called a halt and announced they would rest and continue in the morning. Everyone filed inside to eat, drink, and recover from the road. I went to the stable to wash the horse. The solitude was not entirely unwelcome. Since the battles with the gangs, my command of the storage space had developed considerably, and I had been using quiet moments to push its boundaries further. Through repeated testing, I had established that the space could do more than simply store and retrieve. Objects could also be ejected from it directly. The ejection speed was the limiting factor, slow enough that any competent fighter could react to it. I crouched down, scooped up a handful of sand, and let it fall slowly through my fingers. At the precise moment before it hit the ground, I opened the system space and pulled every grain inside. I held that result in my mind for a moment. Then, I swallowed a fresh handful of sand, and the instant it entered my body, stored all of it into the space from the inside. The implication was immediate and significant. Anything that entered my body could be redirected into storage. I turned it over from several angles, decided it constituted something worth naming, and called it the Inventory Space Divine Art. I was still sitting with that thought when Tongwu's granddaughter appeared at the stable entrance and told me her grandfather was asking for me. She led me through the inn under the curious eyes of everyone we passed and brought me to Tongwu's room. He was seated at the center of it in composed silence. The moment we entered, he told me to get on the bed, sit cross-legged, and remove my outer robe. I was not in a position to argue with that and did exactly as instructed. He said it was even better than he had anticipated. Then he reached into his robes and produced a wooden box. His granddaughter's expression changed the instant she saw it. She asked why he was bringing out the Dragon Phoenix golden needles. Tongwu set the box on the floor and addressed me directly. He asked whether I had ever heard that the same tree produced different fruit depending on the soil. Sweet in good ground, bitter in poor ground. A man was no different. Change the soil, and the fate changed with it. In the Danry family, I was nobody. He explained what the Dragon Phoenix golden needles would do. The golden needle great art would remake me from the inside. The process would be extraordinarily painful, but if I endured it to the end, he could rebuild me completely and cure the muteness. Then he asked if I was willing to gamble. His granddaughter immediately moved to dissuade him, arguing that something of this magnitude required the approval of the Council of Elders before proceeding. Tongwu turned and spoke to her. He smiled. She looked back at him with something close to terror beneath the surface, doing her best to conceal it. I simply watched. I caught on to what they meant almost immediately. When the conversation ended, his gaze shifted back to me. He placed his hand on the glowing box and asked if I was ready to reclaim the surname of the Tang clan. I nodded. The martial world had its own language for exceptional human potential. Heavenly Meridian Body, Cyclic Sacred Emperor Aspect, 9th grade Sacred Bones, Heavenly Martial Heart Veins, Cosmic Sacred Bones. Aptitudes like these were enough to make a person famous from birth, spoken of in terms of once in 100 years, once in 1,000 years, or in the rarest cases, once in 10,000 years. But above all of them, sitting entirely in a category of its own, there existed one further possibility, one that most considered theoretical rather than real, the strongest aptitude in existence, the body, without acupoints. At first, he assumed I was simply someone who had never trained in martial arts, but as he examined me further, he found that my body lacked the acupoints and meridian pathways every human being was born with. It was as though I wasn't human at all. A body without acupoints meant that true chi was bound by no fixed pathways whatsoever. Such a body might even bring back the lost art known as the rain of flowers filling the sky, a technique absent from the martial world for over a century. When that day came, the Tang family alone could bring the entire martial world to its knees. Tongwu, holding what amounted to the future of his entire clan in the room with him, could not keep the smile off his face. He asked me one final time whether I was willing to take the Tang surname, and I looked at him steadily and gave a single nod. He reminded me plainly I was not yet part of the clan. There was still a trial ahead, and it could very well kill me. He asked if I still wanted to go through with it. I nodded again. He gave a warm smile. He told me he would begin by opening my meridians, then set to work. His granddaughter, having failed entirely to talk him out of any of this, gave up and went outside to stand guard. Every Dragon Phoenix golden needle in the wooden box rose into the air simultaneously. Tongwu wrapped them all in true chi and trained every one of them on me. He told me to prepare myself. Then he inserted the first needle into the crown of my head, and everything changed. What Tongwu did not know was that earlier, when he and his granddaughter had communicated by voice transmission, they had assumed I could not hear them. It had not occurred to either of them that lip reading existed, let alone that someone in my position might have spent a previous lifetime developing it specifically as a hunting tool. I had no framework for how I had come to possess something like that. My best guess was that the system had produced it, turning me into something suspended halfway between human and player. Whatever the reason, the situation was clear enough. Tangwu was invested, the needles were already in motion, and the sensible thing was to cooperate fully and see the performance through to the end. By the time the last Dragon Phoenix Golden Needle was placed, my entire body was covered in them. Tangwu surveyed his own work and exhaled quietly, though only temporarily constructed, circulated qi and blood without the slightest obstruction, moving several times faster than any ordinary martial artist could achieve, a rarity not seen in 1,000 years. Then he paused, reached behind him with true qi, and drew the wooden box back toward himself. At the bottom of the box, beneath the corpses of various poisonous insects, a single deadly centipede was still moving. He said it quietly, almost to himself, precisely because something this precious could never be allowed to fall into another's hands. A go had to be placed as a safeguard. A gu was a poisonous insect cultivated through the Tang family's secret methods, designed to lie dormant inside a host's body. If he could not keep me, he would rather destroy me than allow anyone else to have me. The night passed. Tangwu finished his work as dawn approached and formally announced that from this day forward, I was no longer a stable hand of the Danri family. I was a member of the Tang sect, foremost clan of Sichuan. My name would be Tang Sam. I thanked him for the name. It was the first time I had spoken since recovering my voice. I put my clothes back on and walked out. I eased the door open and walked past his granddaughter, who was asleep, and out into the streets. Then I stopped. I opened my hand. The gu manifested through the system and sat there in my palm. I crushed it into pieces. With that, the mute Sosum of the Damli family ceased to exist. I allowed myself a quiet moment of satisfaction. From here on, I was Tang Sam of the Sichuan Tang clan. These would be my new wings. Somewhere far away in another territory, inside one of the buildings, muffled sounds filled the room. Two people were having the time of their lives. The woman felt like she was in heaven. Then she opened her eyes and saw someone standing in the room. She screamed. The moment she did, the assassin struck. The man launched himself clear in an instant. As the woman was cut down, he steadied himself and got a proper look at the intruder. Then he noticed the blood on his silk robes. "Do you have any idea how expensive this is?" He stared at the assassin. "Who the hell are you?" The assassin said nothing and went straight into attack mode, sending another strike forward. The man raised one hand and summoned his sword directly into his grip, using it to deflect the blow cleanly. That was when he noticed something that genuinely irritated him. This assassin was embarrassingly weak. He raised his other hand and summoned his second sword, flashing against the assassin who just barely managed to escape. He wasn't done. He sent strikes flying in every direction. The assassin summoned a shadow, and the man immediately recognized the technique. The shadow managed to block every incoming clash as dark ink flooded the entire area. The man stopped. He called out the name slowly. Inklight Killing Sword. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost from his past. The playboy's expression shifted entirely as he said it had been 10 years. 9 years and 220 days, came the correction. The gray-haired man laughed. Still the same mad cloud, remembering trivialities with that kind of precision. He asked what business was worth, one of the 18 clouds making a personal appearance. Mad Cloud told him he had come to deliver their lord's command. The first scheme was to be carried out. Ash Shadow's breathing changed immediately. He asked where the relevant party was. Shifting Shadow was embedded within the Namong family. On the 15th of the month, it was Shifting Shadow's wedding day. Ash Shadow absorbed that in silence, then asked whether that meant what he thought it meant. If it did, he wanted to know the purge radius. The order was specific. Everyone was to be killed without exception, other than Shifting Shadow himself and a person named Namong Hai. Mad Cloud added that Tong Wu, the soul-chasing poison hand, would be arriving in Inwei shortly. The forces currently on hand might not be sufficient to hold him back. That had been accounted for. 5 shadows would be deployed to occupy Tangwu when the time came. Ash Shadow accepted that, then stopped Mad Cloud before he could leave and asked, almost as an afterthought, what Shifting Shadow's real name actually was. Mad Cloud looked at him without expression, then dissolved into ink and disappeared without a trace. Left alone, Ash Shadow reflected that his own irritating personality had apparently not improved either, and that Shifting Shadow was genuinely enviable. He had always assumed that a life lived as a shadow meant dying alone and unremembered in some cold corner of the world. And yet Shifting Shadow had managed to embed himself among the so-called righteous, build an entirely convincing identity, and was now days away from marrying the greatest beauty in all of Inwei. Ash Shadow snapped his fingers as he walked out of the room. A subordinate materialized immediately at his back. He gave 2 instructions: clean the room and kill every guard who had been on duty that night. The subordinate confirmed the order without hesitation. Ash Shadow was the division leader of the Inwei branch of the Heavenly Demon Divine Cult. known by the title Silver Lust Demon, Broken Shackles Blood, and operating under the code name Ash Shadow. The curtain of the martial world's true theater had only just begun to rise. Around that same time, the Damli forces arrived at the Nanong clan's territory, with the poison specialist leading the way out front. He looked surprised we had made it sooner than expected. This was Nanong territory, a place where the Nanong clan reigned as absolute masters. All of Manhwa was already buzzing with preparations for the coming wedding. As the Namong family's grand wedding day approached, the streets and alleys of Inui filled with a festive atmosphere that left no corner untouched. Everyone was occupied with preparation and celebration. Not everyone was celebrating. A beggar on the street corners pressed his case for a single bite of food. The guard he addressed had no interest whatsoever in the appeal. He told the beggar to get out, and when the beggar refused to move, settled the matter by raising his foot and kicking him off the street entirely. The commotion drew people out from the residence. A young master appeared at the door and asked what was happening outside. A servant told him it was nothing, just a group of beggars refusing to move along. That was Dahak, and his bearing alone confirmed everything the rumors said about him. Dahak walked over to the beggar without hesitation. He crouched down, extended a hand, and asked with genuine warmth whether he was all right. After a few words of comfort, he turned to his servants and instructed them to bring food out. There were still days before the wedding, and there would be leftovers regardless. Then he turned and walked back through the main gate as though the matter had been entirely ordinary. The rumors had not exaggerated. Dahayuk was not only formidable in martial arts, but upright in character, which explained well enough why the young lady of the Namong family had chosen him. He had roamed the martial world alone, defeated the Yin-Yang twin demons, figures who had terrorized the martial world for decades, and ended up as the Namong family's future son-in-law. There were even rumors that he had mastered the ultimate art of the Thunderblade Emperor, a technique lost for 300 years. He spun around immediately, ready to make his feelings on the matter known, and then saw who it was. His tongue stopped working entirely. Tang Wu grabbed the man's face in one hand and flung him backward over his shoulder without breaking stride, remarking that the place was full of useless trash. Behind him, a large group followed in grand procession down the street. Inside the residence, Dahayuk was in the middle of entertaining guests when the noise from outside pulled his attention away again. Tang Wu's voice carried through the walls without difficulty, announcing that he had traveled all this way and that not a single person had come out to receive him, and that he expected everyone to get themselves outside immediately. The Hayuk came out personally. He introduced himself with composed courtesy and invited Tang Wu to come in. Tang Wu looked him over and delivered his verdict without ceremony. Not bad, but only that. Had he encountered Dahak some years earlier, he might have found him genuinely interesting. As things stood, his standards had long since moved beyond this. He lifted his foot and walked straight into the residence without waiting for a response. Hayuk fell into step behind him and guided him toward the main hall. I was standing nearby when an unfamiliar face stopped me cold. The man before me gave me a feeling I could not immediately account for. Then the system resolved the question for me. An enemy more than 10 levels above had entered within 20 meters. I fixed my gaze on him and confirmed it. This person was operating at a level so far beyond my current reach that a direct confrontation was not worth contemplating. But beyond the raw power, something else registered. Most people, even strong ones, carried imbalances in their bodies, gaps and asymmetries that a careful eye could read. This man had none of that. He was perfectly composed in a way that felt deliberate rather than natural. He had concealed his true nature behind a carefully maintained surface, a predator wearing a different kind of mask. The scene shifted to the Namon family's largest imperial hall. Along the roof outside, a row of treasured swords stood planted in sequence, the swords of successive family heads, each one marking a life that had ended and a name the world was slowly forgetting. Tang Wu climbed the steps toward the entrance. He reached the entrance of the hall and looked inside. A familiar figure was already there. Namong Hai addressed Tang Wu as Uncle Tang and remarked that it had genuinely been too long. Tang Wu looked the family head over and told him that a man of his standing really ought to present himself with more dignity, then waved the observation away and conceded that he had not changed at all, which amounted to the same criticism delivered more affectionately. Tang Wu's granddaughter, Tanghua, stood at a distance taking all of this in with open astonishment. Namong Hai noticed her and called out warmly. Tanghua had grown even prettier since they last met. Hug stepped forward at that point and introduced himself to Tanghua with easy courtesy. Tanghua returned the introduction, then asked with a slight smile whether that meant she should be calling him brother-in-law. Namong Hai went immediately and thoroughly embarrassed. In the middle of recovering from that, she noticed there was still a stranger in the hall she had not accounted for. She asked who he was. Tang Wu told her the name was Tong Sam. I stepped forward with a suitable smile as several pairs of eyes turned my way. Before I could say anything, Da Hayuk greeted me first, said he was glad to meet me, used my name as though he already knew it, and extended an invitation for a night cruise on the small lake that evening, suggesting I join them. I accepted. Not long afterward, Dahayuk led the group onto a pleasure boat on the lake. Tanghua experienced the famous lake view for the first time and could barely contain herself. The scenery at night had a reputation that apparently the reality matched without effort. The Menghai and Tanghua drifted into conversation at the rail, absorbed in the view and each other's company. He suggested we leave them to it, have a drink, and called back over his shoulder that he would go below and find something worth drinking. I watched him disappear into the cabin and kept my expression neutral. On the surface, this man was a soon-to-be son-in-law of one of the 5 great families. Underneath that surface lived something entirely different, a predator wearing its most convincing disguise. I recognized the construction because I had built a version of it myself. Whatever he was planning, it was not small. The only open questions were when and where. I was still sitting with that thought when the system cut across it. An enemy more than 10 levels above me had entered within 20 meters. That was not Dua Hayek. He had just gone below. Someone else was on this boat and closing the distance deliberately. I tracked the prompt as it updated and fixed the position, lower deck, directly beneath the hull. A separate expert, moving with patience, staying just out of obvious range. Du Hyuk returned shortly after with an apology about taking a moment to locate the bottle.
I quickly realized that another enemy had arrived, and this person was now standing right where we were,
And presented what he called the finest in his collection. I told him I was not feeling well and excused myself toward the cabin. Something shifted in his expression as I moved away. I kept walking. The system updated again as I reached the cabin door. 11 meters now. I was moving away from the signal and it was still closing. The moment I stepped inside the cabin, the distance collapsed to 1 meter. The expert was in the compartment directly below my feet. I stood there and mapped what I had. 4 separate signals from the system, all more than 10 levels above me. Adding Duhaik made 5 total, all on the same boat. 5 enemies of that caliber did not board a pleasure boat to abduct one woman. If that had been the objective, they would have moved already. The target was almost certainly broader, something involving the Namong family as a whole rather than just Namong High. The system told me these people were more than 10 levels above me. It did not tell me whether they were 20 levels above or 30. That gap could mean anything. People operating at that tier, moving covertly inside Namong family territory, had the capacity to trigger a catastrophe. I ran the geometry of my situation and found it neat in the worst possible way. By my side stood the old man, while ahead of us were the enemies of the naming clan. I grinned. It was truly a dilemma. After a brief moment of thought, I decided to make my move. Just then, the boat reached the shore, and the others stepped onto land, conducting its evening patrol with the thoroughness that came from knowing a major event was days away. The patrol reached the entrance to a waterway, and one guard made the mistake of asking whether checking the waterway was really necessary, whether they might be slightly overdoing it. The captain's face darkened instantly. He asked, with barely restrained impatience, whether the man was genuinely talking back to him over a single pass through a waterway. The wedding was right in front of them. If anything went wrong, none of them would be in a position to explain it away. He punctuated the point by grabbing the man and throwing him directly into the waterway entrance. The rest of the unit exchanged a look, lit their candles, and walked in after him. The captain stood at the waterway entrance and complained to nobody in particular that it would actually be nice if an enemy showed up, something to break the monotony. Inside, his men shuffled through the pitch-black tunnel with nothing but a thread of candlelight between them, muttering about why they had drawn the short end while everyone else was outside eating and drinking. Then I stepped out of the dark in front of them and blew the candle out. What followed in that waterway was brief and unpleasant for everyone involved except me. The sounds of it, blood, screaming, the frantic splash of boots in shallow water, knotted together and then cut off sharply. A final flash of sword light, then silence. Outside, Captain Gosang's patience had run its course. He called into the waterway that if he caught anyone slacking off in there, consequences would follow, then walked in to deliver the threat personally. He found a severed arm floating on the surface of the water. He recognized it immediately as belonging to one of his own men. He turned and ran. In his panic, a faint light caught his eye around the corner ahead. He moved toward it and found something considerably worse than darkness. I was crouching beside a candle, examining the remains of his patrol unit, and observing aloud that I seemed to have misplaced one of the arms. When he appeared, I looked up and remarked that his timing was convenient. I was short exactly one arm. Captain Gosang took in the scene around me, and whatever fear had been driving him converted itself entirely into fury. He drew his sword and charged. Within the first few exchanges, I realized I had miscalculated him badly. This patrol captain captain was operating at a level well above what his rank had led me to expect. He pressed the engagement hard, demanding to know why a guest of Tongwu was doing this. What possible justification existed for any of it? I thought about it for 2 seconds and offered the only answer available to me in that moment. I told him I could not help it and that I was doing this for the Namong family as well. Even I did not believe that as I said it. Gosong detonated. He informed me at considerable volume that I had killed his men and arranged their remains like toys, and that claiming this served the Namong family was the statement of a madman. He promised to carve me apart slowly enough to feel satisfied about it. He opened with the Heavenly Wind sword art. First form, swift wind flowing clouds. I answered with the three forces sword art. Second form. The techniques met head-on and I was blasted backward immediately. His power was fiercer than the exchange had suggested. He followed without pause, swinging out consecutive arcs of sword light that gave me no room to find my footing. The sharp light swept across my body and set me flying a second time. My health bar was sitting at a quarter. Gosang closed in again, and with one clean sweep took the fingers from the hand holding my sword. He asked, with a satisfaction, how I intended to resist now. A streak of swordlight grazed his cheek from behind before he finished the sentence. Close enough that another inch would have ended him on the spot. He stood very still for a moment, processing what had just happened. My right hand was gripping the long sword again. Gosang raised his sword to block, and the blade simply vanished from where it had been. His strike hit nothing. His balance collapsed forward, and before he could make sense of what technique had just been used against him, my kick connected and sent him flying clean out of the waterway. He was still tumbling through the air, but my swordlight chased after him. One more advance, and it was finished. My body hit the ground before I could take the step. I lay there for a moment and acknowledged that the last move had worked and that I had come genuinely close to not surviving this. Too many wounds. The health bar was nearly empty. The one piece of good news was that the experience bar sat almost full, which meant there was only one option left. I gritted my teeth, pushed myself upright, raised my sword, and charged forward again. He asked how I had the nerve to keep forcing myself in the state I was in, and announced he would finish it cleanly. He opened with the Heavenly Wind sword art's final form. Heavenly Wind splits the sky and brought the blade down. A massive arc of sword light. I wove through the arch without stopping, and then two streaks of sword light came from an angle I had not accounted for and took both arms off simultaneously. Gosang looked at what remained of me and said the obvious, that I had no arms and no sword and no means of continuing, and that it was over. He called me an idiot for not weighing my own capabilities before challenging someone like him. I smiled at him. I told him he had fallen for it. Then I opened my mouth, and a streak of sword light shot up from it directly at his head. The angle was impossible to read and impossible to dodge. It pierced straight through. The level up notification sounded. Light exploded from my body and lit up the entire area in an instant. Everyone in the surrounding grounds saw the pillar of light. Nobody knew what had caused it. After I finished positioning the final arm, the waterway was complete. I surveyed the arrangement with quiet satisfaction. It was exactly what I had intended. While that was unfolding, a brutal massacre was consuming the Danri family. Black-cloaked figures had stormed through every entrance and left nothing alive behind them. Danri Qianwu stood in the ruins of everything he had built and felt the will that had held him upright simply give way. A black shadow cut its way to him through the carnage. The leader of the raid, Mad Cloud, Danri Qianwu, asked what his family had done to deserve this. What crime had brought this down on them? Mad Cloud cut him off mid-sentence with a single slash that took half his head and answered the question simply. Being weak was the crime. Then he sent word to Ash Shadow that the Danri family had been exterminated and that the plan could move forward.
At the same time, Ash was holding a girl he had just finished having his way with. As his gaze fell on her clothes, he recognized the emblem embroidered on her dress. She was a member of the Danri clan. A look of disappointment appeared on his face.
The messenger reached Ash Shadow shortly after. He remarked that Mad Cloud had finished quickly. The man really had no idea how to enjoy himself. Then the question that had been sitting at the back of his mind surfaced again. That pillar of light at the Namong family. What had it been? Shifting Shadow would never use something so conspicuous to send a signal, which meant either the Namong family had discovered the plan or something else entirely had happened that he had not accounted for. He gave the order immediately to seal every route leading out of the Onway. The first scheme had begun. The Namong family had already found what I left in the waterway. Written on the wall in blood were the words, "When the moon is full, the emperor falls, an outsider shall take the throne." Even the family head went pale at the scene. He asked what kind of madman could have done something like this, then answered his own question before anyone else could. What was clear was that the Namong family had been targeted, and with the wedding days away, the timing could not have been worse. He ordered an immediate reinforcement of all positions and a full investigation of every suspicious individual on the grounds. Then he left the waterway alone. He turned the message over as he walked. The emperor almost certainly referred to the Namong family itself. The full moon referred to the wedding day. The outsider? That was the question that mattered. Whoever it was, he intended to drag them out into the open. In the imperial hall, the Namong family's upper ranks had already convened an emergency meeting and were in the process of disagreeing with each other. One faction argued that the blood writing was obviously a deliberate frame, that pointing suspicion at Du Hyuk on the eve of his marriage into the family would make the Namong family a laughingstock. The other faction held that what mattered was the message itself. Any rational person reading the word outsider would think of Du Hyuk. One voice cut through the argument with a point neither side could easily dismiss. Whoever had entered the grounds had done so without detection, killed the patrol guards openly, and then left a message so obvious it bordered on theatrical. That was not the behavior of someone conducting reconnaissance, and everyone in that hall had seen the pillar of light the night before, a signal so conspicuous it could be seen from half the estate away. Arresting Da Hyuk on the basis of a stranger's message and being wrong about it would cost the Namong family something that could not easily be recovered. The argument went back and forth until the weight of unresolved tension inside the hall became difficult to breathe through. A third voice stepped in to settle it, or at least to redirect it. The family head had already dispatched both the Celestial Thunder Unit Leader and the Heavenly Wind Unit Leader to investigate. If a genuine strike against the Namong family was being prepared for the full moon day, evidence of it would already be surfacing. They would wait for the results before drawing conclusions. Then a man ran into the hall. It was Namong Gu, the Celestial Thunder Unit Leader, who had been sent out. He delivered his report without preamble. The entire investigation unit had been annihilated. Not one had returned within the agreed time. Not one had returned at all. The hall erupted. Even he seemed to find his own conclusion difficult to accept. He said it appeared the Namong family might have been surrounded. The room resisted the idea immediately. The 18 Yangtze River water forts controlled the waterways but held a standing agreement of mutual non-interference. If the waterways were not the avenue, then the inland routes had been sealed. But what force operating within Anhui had the reach to encircle the Namong family entirely? The suggestion was called absurd before it had fully landed. One voice pointed out that everyone had overlooked something. There was exactly one force in the entire martial world with the capability to surround the Namong family. Heavenly Demonic Castle. At the same time, I found myself amused by the poem I had just recited. I repeated the words with a faint smile. What none of them realized, however, was the truth. The king mentioned in that poem was me. The following morning I began cultivating in earnest. Through repeated attempts, I finally succeeded in condensing true chi within my body. I sat with the sensation and let the previous night replay in my mind in full detail. Every exchange with Goseng, every attack he had directed at me, every moment where a slightly different decision on either side would have produced a completely different result. I broke it all down and absorbed it. If he had opened with the first form of the Heavenly Wind Sword art instead of holding it, I would not have survived. That single realization reframed everything I thought I understood about the gap between game skills and genuine martial arts. From a certain angle, real martial arts were a more sophisticated form of cheating than anything the system had given me. The principle was straightforward enough. Control the flow of true chi through the major acupoints. Release it in a concentrated burst at the precise moment of engagement and forge that energy into the strike itself. One swing of the sword became something that could consume the enemy directly. I rehearsed it again and again until I could recreate the victory of that night using nothing but my own understanding and strength. Tang Wu's modifications to my meridian structure were proving more valuable than I had initially calculated. Simply reviewing a battle in sufficient detail was producing genuine insight. The acupoints were temporary constructions, not permanent. But as long as I burned them into muscle memory and trained them past the point of conscious thought, it was only a matter of time before I had real command of martial arts. The level counter updated as I worked through it. Level 13. Alongside it came a new prompt. My first class advancement mission. Ronin Tester. Exclusive class mission. Completion condition. Hunt 100 enemies above level 10. I stared at that for a moment. Even in this martial world, class advancement was possible. 100 enemies above level 10, roughly the tier those patrol guards had been operating at. Gosang himself had probably been sitting around level 15. I had believed I was becoming strong. Looking at that prompt, the road ahead extended considerably further than I had appreciated. The thought was still settling when a massive explosion detonated from a large building not far behind me. 10 minutes earlier, Du Hyuk had gone to inspect the waterway entrance where the previous night's events had taken place. The servants had already cleaned the area thoroughly. Da Hulk left the waterway with nothing and returned in frustration. The pillar of light from the previous night had done exactly what he feared. Security across the entire estate had been tightened layer by layer, and the streets were noticeably heavier with martial artists. He needed to get word to the shadows as quickly as possible. Then, Namangan stepped into his path with a group of subordinates behind him. Hugh's chest tightened immediately. As a hallmaster, Namangan had no business appearing at this location at this time. He had heard the wedding procession route pass through here and had come to look it over. Namangan smiled and asked whether, having looked it over, he found it auspicious or ominous. That single question put everything in sharp relief. Hyuk scanned the subordinates arranged behind Namangan and read their stances clearly. Every one of them was poised to move. He invited Du Hyuk to accompany them to the Imperial Hall and suggested he not be too quick to refuse. Du Hyuk had no intention of going anywhere with them. He had invested considerable time and effort into building the identity he was currently wearing and had not expected it to be stripped away this quickly. Namangan's hand went to his sword. Then the building behind them exploded. Every head turned at once. In the chaos of that single distracted second, lightning coiled around Dur Hayek's body as he stepped forward deliberately. The lightning blade art, first form. Lightning advanced assault. A bolt crashed into the crowd ahead. When the dust and smoke cleared, out of what had been dozens of men, one person remained alive. Among Gon stood in the wreckage and could not reconcile what he had just witnessed. Even accounting for a surprise attack, a single strike eliminating that many trained fighters at once was beyond what he had believed Dahai capable of. He had badly underestimated the man. A gate guard broke from the surrounding crowd and threw himself forward, shouting at Durahal self to stop. Hugh cut him down without breaking stride or changing expression. The people around him were insects. The ones watching from further back read the scene and ran, screaming that he had gone mad, that the performance had nearly suffocated him. Killing freely was the only genuine pleasure left. Mangan screamed at him, demanding to know who he actually was. Hayuk told him to go ask the King of Hell. He activated the lightning blade art and drove a sword strike directly at Namangan with the speed of lightning itself. With the sword tip an inch from connecting, a dragon phoenix golden needle drove itself into the back of Jushuk's hand and a pair of feet landed firmly on his blade.
At the same time, I watched the scene unfold, and it was exactly as I had expected. Tang Wu stepped in. The Thunder Fist expert's attack exploded forward, but Tang Wu intercepted it head-on. At the same moment, he flicked his wrist, drawing the hidden needles from behind his back.
Anungan, having just survived the closest thing to death he had ever encountered, thanked Tang Wu. Tang Wu remarked that the martial world was becoming more ruthless by the generation. He had not expected a son-in-law to raise a hand against the man's own future father-in-law. The corner of Dahai's mouth curved. He said that in the martial world, the less feeling one carried, the longer one survived. A second explosion rolled in from the direction of the Imperial Hall before anyone could respond to that. Tongwu told Da Hayek he had no time to waste and demanded a full account, identity, scheme, every detail without omission. He added that he had long heard of the soul-chasing Poison Hand's divine hidden weapon art, and that he was genuinely interested in experiencing it firsthand. From the side, I could tell this guy was planning to run. What was strange, however, was that he had come alone. It looked like he had been searching for something all this time. Meanwhile, the girl couldn't understand why her grandfather was there. The moment I turned my gaze toward her, I immediately understood. This bastard hadn't wasted a single second. As Tong Wu unleashed a barrage of lightning flight needles, the man grinned and charged straight toward the girl. Just as Tong Wu was about to finish him off, the man suddenly switched targets. Tong Wu's eyes widened. The attack wasn't aimed at him. It was aimed at his granddaughter. "No!" he shouted, calling out her name. Fortunately, I stepped in at the perfect moment. Boom! A massive explosion erupted behind us. When the dust settled, a huge crater had been carved into the ground. The old man frantically called out to his granddaughter. Then he saw us. I was standing there, barely having escaped the blast while protecting her. For the first time, genuine surprise appeared on his face. I had actually saved her. Without a word, I stretched out my hand and handed the girl over to him. He was just about to thank me when a loud laugh echoed through the battlefield. The Lightning Master stood above us, looking down like a predator watching its prey. Even I had to admit it. This guy was overwhelmingly powerful, powerful enough to stand on equal footing with Tongwu, a true master. Then he bid the old man farewell. "Don't worry," he said with a smile. "I'll come visit you again soon." Turning around, he began to walk away as if everything was over. Then suddenly, he stopped. A strange feeling washed over him. For the first time, he felt like prey. His head slowly turned. What was that? His eyes searched the area before finally landing on me. I was staring directly at him. The man paused in surprise. Then a smile spread across his face. He had finally realized it. I was the one who had ruined his plans. The one hiding in the shadows. The one who had been playing with all of them from the very beginning. He said he would remember me until the next time they met. Then his figure flashed, and he was gone at speed. Tang Wu moved to give chase immediately. Then Tang was stirred in his arms, and the calculation changed in an instant. He stopped, cursed under his breath, and conceded that Do Hyuk had played that last card well. By evening, the Imperial Hall had been reduced to smoking ruin. The Namong family had sustained heavy casualties before finally killing the attackers, and the scale of the damage relative to the number who had caused it was difficult to accept. 4 men had done all of this. Worse, one of them had been recognized, a member of the Yin-Yang twin demon, a pair that Do Hyuk had publicly claimed to have killed years ago. The implication landed heavily. The Namong family had been operating inside a constructed story from the very beginning, manipulated at every level. The carrier pigeons sent to the Martial Alliance had been intercepted and killed by hawks that appeared from nowhere. The protective formations surrounding the sect had been destroyed in the explosion. Every route out had been sealed. They were, as Namong Gon put it with blunt precision, turtles in a jar. He dragged his wounded body forward and presented the family head with 3 options: fight to the death, break through and flee, or send for reinforcements. The family had acknowledged that the first 2 were not viable and asked about the third. Reaching the Martial Alliance at full speed from their current position would take a week at minimum. Breaking through the blockade surrounding them required someone whose movement technique was beyond anything the enemy had planned around. There was exactly one person present who fit that description: Tang Wu, the soul-chasing poison hand. Even for Tang Wu, breaking through alone against that many enemies would be asking too much. Namong Gan proposed a way forward. Several hundred guests were still inside the family grounds, all of them desperate to leave. That desperation could be turned into an asset, a means of resolving the crisis rather than simply enduring it. The Namong family convened urgently with the strongest among the remaining guests. When the family head's eyes moved toward me, Tang Wu cut off the unspoken question immediately. He said the boy behind him had already taken the Tang surname and could be trusted entirely. Whatever needed to be said could be said directly. Then he asked Tang Wu to escort the assembled guest to Soho Lake and request reinforcements from there. A boat route from Soho Lake to the Yangtze River would bring them within reach of the 18 river fortresses. The boats had already been gathered and the guests assembled at the South Watergate. He hoped they could depart that same night. Tang Wu asked him plainly whether he had thought it through. Once he left, most of the people remaining inside would die. The family head's expression gave the answer before his words did. The family head spoke again as Tang Wu turned to leave. He asked that Namong Hai be taken along as well. He did not want her to witness what was coming between him and Do Hyuk. Tang Wu stopped. He asked whether things had truly come to this point. The family head went still. The tears he had been holding back rolled down before he could stop them. He said quietly that the one staying behind might not even hold on for 11 days. Tang Wu called him an idiot. He said his name with the full weight of a man who had carried it across a lifetime of impossible situations. Tang Wu, the soul-chasing poison hand, and told the family head to hold the line. Stake every life if necessary, but endure. He would come back with reinforcements. I had watched all of it from the side without moving. I went alone to the riverside afterward to think. Saving Tang Hua had been genuine enough, but I had not anticipated that the consequence would be overhearing the Namong family's entire plan in detail. The plan itself carried too many uncertain variables to feel reliable. More immediately inconvenient was the fact that Tang Hua had attached herself to me and showed no sign of moving elsewhere. She stood nearby looking thoroughly irritated, muttering about what her grandfather was thinking and why she had to spend her time standing next to someone who never said anything. Then she looked at my back for a moment and her expression shifted into something she did not appear to have planned for. She moved to my side and said quietly that she wanted to thank me for saving her life, that I should not misunderstand. She was only saying it now because she was not certain she would have another opportunity. Something in her expression as she said it produced a feeling in me that I could not immediately categorize. Elsewhere, Ash Shadow stood at an elevated position looking out across the Namong family grounds in the distance. A figure approached from behind him. He greeted the arrival by one name, then corrected himself and used the other. He asked for an explanation of how things had reached this point. Shifting Shadow read his tone and observed that he sounded as though the first scheme had already failed. Ash Shadow asked whether that was not precisely the case. All 4 Shadow guards were dead, and the fact that Shifting Shadow was standing there in the open meant the first scheme had collapsed. Shifting Shadow told him he was wrong. The core objective of the first scheme had been to position him as a hero of the Righteous Alliance. The fact that Shifting Shadow was visible now did not mean that objective was beyond reach. Then his body began to change. His skin moved in a way that skin was not meant to move. When it settled, Shifting Shadow was wearing Namong Hai's face and form with complete precision. He said it simply. With that appearance, he would not need to do anything deliberate. he would naturally become the heir of the Namong family. Ash Shadow stared. Then he burst out laughing and said that among everyone he had ever known, Shifting Shadow was without question the most thoroughly twisted. The situation had been completely rewritten. He added, after a moment, that Namong Hai's reputation as the greatest beauty in Inwei was clearly well earned, and that even knowing the full truth of what he was looking at, his heart was doing something inconvenient. Shifting Shadow's expression went cold immediately. He asked whether Ash Shadow wanted to die. Ash Shadow told him not to be so sensitive about it. Both auras erupted simultaneously. The air between them bent under the combined pressure. Shifting Shadow was a fraction from making his move when a large bird swept across the sky directly overhead. There was a letter tied to its leg. The letter contained a single word, float. The ships had already set sail. Shifting Shadow said it was time to move as well. Shadow asked what he planned to do. He said he intended to follow the hawk and find Water Shadow's position. Ash Shadow pointed out that the Namong family side was obviously where the more interesting developments were unfolding. Shifting Shadow disagreed. He had found something more interesting than that. Ash Shadow asked if he meant the soul-chasing poison hand and warned him not to overplay his hand. Then something in Shifting Shadow's manner made him pause. He asked, slowly, whether this was about the flash of light from the previous night. Shifting Shadow confirmed it without elaborating. Then he disappeared before Ash Shadow could form a response, dissolving from the spot as completely as though he had never been standing there. At the South Water Gate, Tongwu's fleet departed in full procession. I stayed close to Tongwu's side with Tonghua nearby, unaware that every movement on the water was being tracked by sentinels positioned in the shadows along the banks. One of them folded away his spyglass the moment we cleared the gate and moved immediately toward the main camp. He reported to his commander that the departure had been confirmed. The commander, who was, as it turned out, the chief of the 18 Yangtze River strongholds, told him to let them sail. On the ship, with a route ahead that could ignite at any moment, I ran the geometry of the situation quietly. Tongwu was a peerless master, but he was traveling with two burdens, Tonghua and Namong Hai. If things reached a genuine dead end and someone had to be left behind, the answer was obvious. It would be me. I needed to plan for that outcome before it arrived. What I had not planned for was the silence. The enemy had demonstrated the capability to encircle the Namong family entirely. By every reasonable logic, this water route should have been sealed before we reached it. Tangwu issued the order to reduce speed as a precaution. Everyone on deck settled into a taut, watchful stillness. Then a crewman at the bow called out in a hoarse voice that there was light ahead. In the depths of the mist, a row of blazing lights ignited one after another in a long, steady line. As the shapes behind them resolved into clarity, the crew surged onto the deck with shouts of relief. People grabbed each other's arms and pointed. Reinforcements. The symbol on the sails was recognized and the deck erupted in celebration. I looked at those sails and felt nothing that resembled relief. Dozens of ships had materialized from the mist to seal the route ahead in a formation. Tangwu reached the same conclusion at the same moment I did. He shouted the order to turn around immediately and told everyone on deck in the clearest possible terms that the ships ahead were the enemy. It was already too late. The chief stronghold master stood at the bow of the lead vessel with rows of archers positioned behind him. He gave the order in a single cold word. The sky darkened with arrows. Flaming projectiles rained across every deck in a barrage that left nowhere to move and nowhere to hide. People dropped where they stood. On our ship, Tongwu held the line alone. I stood behind him and watched the scene across the water. Tangwu's voice cut across the deck, demanding to know who was still alive and ordering the ships turned around immediately. Then he looked back and his expression changed completely. The waterway behind us had been sealed while we were watching the front. Ships from the heavenly demonic castle had moved in and closed the gap without a sound. We were surrounded on all sides. Tongwu gritted his teeth and ordered the sailors to steer hard toward the nearest shore. The ship never reached it. An enemy vessel drove into us. A figure launched from it into the air and came down with a staff strike that reduced several people on deck to nothing in a single blow. He landed, straightened up, and gave the order to kill everyone aboard. The massacre began immediately. Tangwu watched it from across the deck and felt something give way inside him. He turned and walked toward Namong Hai. A silver needle found the side of her neck, and she went down before she understood what had happened. Tanghua rushed forward the moment she saw it, demanding to know what he was doing. Tangwu told her simply that the water route was sealed and they had to go ashore. He could not carry 3 people at speed through what was waiting for them in the dark. He said only 2. He acknowledged that he had coveted my aptitude from the beginning, that he had intended to use me as the foundation stone of the Tang family's future. Then his voice dropped further and he said something that seemed to surprise even himself. He said it appeared that he had grown old enough to develop genuine feeling for what had only ever been meant to be a tool. He told me he would not kill me. He would not save me either. Tanghua looked at me with an expression I did not have a clean word for. At the moment of life and death, she gritted her teeth and turned away. He said my name, the one he had given me, and told me that perhaps the Tang family would not remember Tang Sam, but that he personally would not forget. Then he was airborne and gone into the darkness, Namong Hai across one arm and Tang Hua following close behind. Tang Hua looked back at me once from the air. Then she was gone too. The flames rose around the ship in every direction. From this moment, the battle was mine. A burly man hauled himself onto the deck with a saber already swinging. The instant he lunged, I turned and took his head off cleanly at the neck. Then I picked up the headless body and walked forward with it, one step at a time into whatever was coming. The hunt had begun. Across the ship, sailors were being worked through methodically by the enemy. Then a figure emerged slowly from the wall of flames, and a bald man stared at it. He asked haltingly whether I was actually all right. I told him I had never been better. The Namong family ships burned across the river in every direction. Through the middle of it, Tongwu moved at speed. Then he noticed something on the ground. A faint glow was spreading across the area. His eyes narrowed. The demon dogs of the heavenly castle. For a moment, he wondered if they had been hiding their forces all along. Without hesitation, he prepared a massive attack. The first needle shot forward like a streak of light. In an instant, it tore through the battlefield, wiping out the entire group. Then he descended from the sky and landed immediately afterward. A moment later, his granddaughter arrived with the other clan members. Looking at them, he spoke in a serious tone. "We need to move. Hurry." Without wasting another second, he and his granddaughter set off. The rest of the group quickly followed behind them. On the other side of the carnage, I was standing among the enemy. They had not identified me. What they could not see was the body of one of their own beneath my feet. Then the system window appeared. First class advancement quest. Current count 18 of 100. I ran back through the night's work and found myself genuinely uncertain which kills had met the level threshold and which had not. One of the men nearby approached and held out a strip of cloth, suggesting with some urgency that I cover my face. He pointed out that I had no idea what I currently looked like. I considered my reflection in the water below the deck. My face was completely saturated in blood. I took the cloth and wrapped it around my face without argument. The Vice Stronghold leader arrived shortly after, stroking his mustache as he surveyed the wreckage around him and observing that the place had been turned into a thorough bloodbath. Several of them stammered through their acknowledgments of his arrival and asked nervously why he had come personally. He asked for a status report. One of the men delivered it. Everyone on the ships had been killed, but Tong Wu, along with several experts and a number of survivors, had reached the shore and were no longer on the water. The vice leader scratched his head. He said he would need to bring this development to the stronghold leader and told the group to hold their positions and wait for further orders. Every head went down in immediate compliance. I stood at the edge of the group with the cloth across my face and my eyes fixed on the vice leader. I was already calculating. The stronghold fleet began moving forward. On a separate ship, a dangerous-looking woman addressed the vice leader and noted his late arrival with mild reproach. He asked, with his characteristic unhurried curiosity, how she had known he was coming. She told him Ash Shadow had sent word in advance. Then she observed that the smile never left his face regardless of what form he was wearing. Shifting Shadow stroked his mustache and said he would keep it in mind. He asked what the current plan was regarding Tongwu. She smiled and told him they were driving Tongwu toward Jianzhong Mountain precisely as intended. That location would serve as his tomb. Shifting Shadow considered the geography, half mountain, half valley, with a cliff edge at the far end that offered no exit. Tongwu was almost certainly climbing as fast as he could move, with no idea that the destination he was racing toward had been selected for him long before he started running. The woman gave the order to prepare for departure with the remaining forces. As Shifting Shadow turned to leave, he reflected that one of the 10 greats would soon be facing 2 shadows, possibly 3. He decided that certainty was preferable to possibly and left the number open. Before he went, he turned back and asked whether she had encountered anyone unusual, someone with pitch-black eyes, or perhaps an expert whose martial arts produced light. She said she had not. He fell into thought. Every direction had been completely sealed, and yet this individual had disappeared without leaving any trace behind. He concluded with a quiet, unhurried smile that if the mystery proved inconvenient enough, a thorough massacre of the surrounding area would resolve it efficiently enough. On the other side of the mountain, Tongwu pushed the group through dense jungle at a pace that their bodies were struggling to maintain. Enemy forces found them again before long and came in fast. Tongwu answered with his poisonous needles, working through the attackers with the precision of someone who had been doing this for 6 decades, while the exhausted Namong clan members pulled themselves together and fought alongside him.
Tongwu glanced at the remaining survivors and instructed his men to continue forward. Meanwhile, the Danri clan chief looked at his exhausted subordinates and gritted his teeth. "We'll rest here for a moment," he ordered. After several minutes of rest, the Danri clan chief began assessing their situation. That's when he realized something alarming. More than half of the Black Crow unit had been wiped out.
Geo, who should have joined them by now, had vanished without any word. The only clear priority was to return to the Danry clan as quickly as the group could be moved. Then he heard something in the bushes. He ordered the Black Crow unit to ready themselves and demanded that whoever was concealed step forward. Pirates emerged from the tree line. The Naman clan members around him went rigid. I stood among the pirates with my face wrapped in cloth. Beneath the cloth, I was smiling. The real entertainment was about to begin. The pirates wore their bloodlust openly, resolved to leave nobody standing. Opposite them, the Naman clan warriors held their ground. Then, both sides moved at once. The battlefield collapsed into chaos immediately.
I immediately laughed at my former master and charged forward. The moment our weapons collided, a brilliant flash of light erupted from the impact. He quickly realized he was already approaching his limit and needed to finish the battle as soon as possible. Without hesitation, he activated the single-stream 10-sword style, followed by the flying swallow 10 successive swords. A relentless storm of strikes descended upon me. As I blocked and dodged his attacks, I couldn't help but smile. I could see every movement of his sword. Seizing an opportunity, I created some distance between us. He lunged forward instantly, unleashing a powerful strike that I barely managed to block. I immediately countered with a kick that sent the old man flying backward. Not giving him a chance to recover, I followed up with a 3-4 sword. However, the old man spotted a tiny opening. In a desperate gamble, he rushed forward with a dagger and drove it straight into my body.
He was certain it had landed. Something felt wrong before he could confirm it. He looked and found his blade embedded in the neck of the pirate who had been positioned just off my shoulder. He stared at that for a moment, his certainty dissolving all at once. The strike had been flawless by any measure he understood. In a duel to the death between martial artists, the one who conceals the most walks away. He had shown me everything. I had shown him almost nothing. He looked into my eyes as that settled over him. Something in what he saw there produced. Before he could follow that thread, I pulled daggers from the system space and released them in a simultaneous barrage directly at him. He threw himself into evasion with everything his depleted body had left. He had been watching me produce weapons from empty air throughout the engagement. I shifted position fluidly, keeping myself clear of contact, moving in a way that left no clean angle. Then a pirate came at the leader from behind. He registered the threat from both directions simultaneously. He was completely trapped. Blood sprayed across the battlefield, but none of it was his. I had cut the attacker down from behind before the strike landed and warned the others around me, without raising my voice, that this hunt was mine and interference was not welcome. The leader stared at me. Then, the moment it became undeniable, he screamed my name, Sosum. Then, he charged straight at me, furious, asking since when I had been deceiving. I could barely open my eyes while he blocked every strike. The anger on his face brought back everything that had happened. The suicide, all of it. He shoved me aside and went for another attack, calling me nothing but a rat who cleans horses. That was his mistake. My sword suddenly moved like a snake. While he was still in the air, I sliced off both his arms. Bro's face looked like it was buffering in real time. Realizing he needed to go berserk, he exploded into pieces instead. Then I reminded his corpse of what I'd said earlier. The one who hides more has the advantage. The battle ended with me winning, and one of them immediately complained, "Where are the reinforcements?" I thought the same thing. There had to be a reason. Then, one of us finally spotted them. He wondered why the higher-ups were always so slow, but then he noticed something strange. The others were wearing their clothes backwards. Confused, he shouted at the stronghold leader, demanding an explanation. He got one. A massive clash instantly blew his body apart. The rest of us froze in shock. It was the water shadow. Grinding her teeth, she declared that no one should be left alive. The chaos on the mountain took a turn that nobody on the wrong side of it saw coming. Water Shadow's forces turned on their own allies without any warning whatsoever. Several men dropped screaming onto already bloodied ground, unable to process the fact that the people killing them were the same people they had trusted minutes ago. Another froze mid-strike, his hand refusing to continue moving against men he had stood beside all night. The hesitation cost him everything. The message was efficient and clear. Hesitate and die here, or keep moving and die later on, someone else's terms. Survival instinct made the choice for most of them. Steel and screaming filled the forest continuously. I had watched all of it from behind a large rock nearby without making a sound. The moment the killing stopped, I was already moving deeper into the forest at full speed. Behind a tree, I paused and listened. The orders being shouted through the forest, nobody was to leave the mountain alive. The mountain was already surrounded. This was not a pursuit. It was an extermination operation with a perimeter, and the enemy was not drawing any distinction between outsiders and their own people. Everyone inside the boundary had become disposable. For the first time since crossing into this world, I was the one inside the trap. I kept moving through the forest and came across a small group of enemy soldiers resting in a clearing ahead. I did not slow down. I shifted the weapon into whipsword configuration and swept through them in a single pass. Every one of them hit the ground before the sound of the strike had finished traveling through the trees. I checked the status window as I landed. The level bar had moved significantly after the continuous engagements. A second squad appeared in the distance, shouting to nearby units, and felt an idea assembling itself quietly at the back of my mind. Further up the mountain, Tang Wu's group had just finished putting down another enemy unit. Tang Hua pulled close to her grandfather and said quietly that something felt wrong about the way the enemy was moving. Tang Hua had already noticed. The attacks were not random. They were consistently pushing the survivors in one direction, upward, toward the peak. One of the survivors came crashing back through the tree line in a state of barely contained panic, insisting that everyone needed to see what was ahead immediately. A cliff face dropped away in front of them, massive and absolute, blocking every path forward completely. The despair that crossed every face in that moment required no words. The cliff edge broke whatever remained of the group's composure. Tang Wu's patience ran out. He did not raise his voice. He reminded the people crumbling around him that he himself, older, injured, carrying more weight than any of them, had not surrendered. He intended to kill as many as possible on the way and expected the same from everyone else. Heads went down. Then another group broke through the tree line. Tang Wu and Tang Hua moved into position immediately. One of the newcomers raised both hands quickly. They had also been betrayed. Tang Wu listened with narrowed eyes and extracted the useful part of it immediately. If genuine chaos had broken out among the enemy forces, that chaos was a window. He ordered everyone to prepare to descend before the routes were completely sealed. Laughter rolled through the forest from somewhere nearby. Then Water's shadow stepped out of the shadows with Shifting Shadow beside her and an army of soldiers filling the tree line at their backs. Shifting Shadow walked forward and offered Tang Wu his assessment of the evening, that he had fled desperately across the mountain only to corner himself at a dead end like a rat. Tang Wu demanded to know who he was actually dealing with. Shifting Shadow obliged him. The transformation reversed itself and Du Hyuk's face reappeared. The rage that went through Tang Wu at the sight of that face was not small. Water Shadow grew impatient beside him and pointed out that there was no reason to extend this. The soul-chasing poison hand needed to be dealt with. Shifting Shadow told her there was no rush. Tang Wu's death was already decided. Besides, there was still one person unaccounted for. He turned back to Tang Wu and asked about the worthless piece of trash Tang Wu had been dragging around with him. He was asking about me. The pieces assembled themselves quickly in my mind. The enemy had been looking for me all along. The decision to eliminate even their own allies, a move that had seemed excessive at first, made complete sense once I understood what had prompted it. The flash of light that night had done more than expose Du Hyuk's identity, something that had single-handedly destroyed the first scheme from the inside. I had become a loose end that the operation could not afford to leave alive. The realization that an entire organization was actively hunting me produced an emotion I had not expected: excitement. Shifting Shadow, meanwhile, had arrived at his own conclusion about me, that whatever had produced a flash of light that violent could not simply be dead somewhere on the mountain. He shouted into the dark, telling me directly that we were destined to meet again, as he had said before, that I should stop wasting his time and began counting down. I came out of the darkness like a line of lightning, and the throats and bodies of the subordinates around Shifting Shadow opened simultaneously. Shifting Shadow laughed. He had known I was there. Then the system window appeared with my current stats and ability value, and the level-up light detonated outward an instant later. The brightness consumed everything, swallowing my figure completely. When it faded, I was gone. For one fraction of a moment, he thought he had detected a shadow moving inside the light itself. His gaze tracked toward the cliff edge. Neither he nor Tang Wu would survive that fall intact.
He wondered if I committed suicide. After a long silence, he let out a sigh and said the whole thing left a bad taste in his mouth. Then he turned to face the survivors. At that moment, the young lady finally woke up, completely confused. She looked around and wondered what was going on. The moment she saw her fiancé, my guy asked if she was always this calm and able to grasp the situation so quickly. The old dude wasn't interested in small talk. He immediately ordered everyone to fall back. Then Shifting Shadow called out to everyone, telling them to capture Tang Wu.
Then a figure walked onto the battlefield and told everyone to wait a moment. He stumbled forward with a grin stretched across a face and body drenched entirely in blood. The old man realized the situation had gotten even worse. Another Beyond Peak Realm expert had joined the battle. Then his face froze in shock when he saw the souvenir the guy was holding. Only then did he remember. The weirdo casually threw the gift toward them. The young lady's eyes widened in disbelief as he proudly announced that the gift was the head of the Nanming clan leader. For a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. The young lady rushed forward, her hands trembling as she picked up her grandfather's head. Beside her, Tang Wu's rage exploded. Meanwhile, the weirdo covered his face and started laughing. Seeing her cry while holding her grandfather's head was apparently the funniest thing he'd seen all day. He even admitted that buying the gift was worth it just for that reaction. Bro was so unhinged that even his own teammates looked at him like, yeah, this guy's a psycho. But my boy wasn't done talking. He declared that the Nanming clan was finished and that Tong Wu would be joining them soon. Grinding his teeth, he bragged that he would soon have the heads of 2 Beyond Peak Realm experts for their wives to hold. Silence fell over the battlefield again. Then, a terrifying green aura erupted around Tang Wu. Tong Wu moved before anyone else processed what was happening. Poisonous needles shot from his hands and pierced directly into both Tonghua and Na Monghai. She stared at him in confusion, wondering what he was doing. The young lady was already too shocked to react. Tang Wu explained that he had poured half of his internal energy into those needles. The backlash could cripple them for life, but keeping the 2 of them alive was all that mattered to him. Shifting Shadow immediately ordered everyone to attack. At the same time, the old man reintroduced himself and told them to survive no matter what. Even if they were broken, even if they lost everything, they had to stay alive and return one day to repay the blood debt owed to him and Tongwu. With that, the 2 women fell from the cliff. The weirdo screamed in disbelief. His prize had just escaped. He immediately charged at Tongwu, but the moment he sensed the aura surrounding him, all his arrogance vanished. For the first time, he started wondering what exactly had happened. Tang Wu slowly raised his hand and beckoned them forward. Come. The only thing he had left was the empty title of one of the 10 greats. From this moment onward, the soul-chasing poison hand would reap their spirit essence. While all of that was unfolding above, I was falling. I drove my sword into the cliff wall, slowing the drop to something manageable while I worked out the remaining distance. Approximately 500 meters descended, somewhere between 1,200 and 1,500 still to go. Climbing down a cliff face of this scale under normal circumstances was effectively suicide. I ran the numbers on my current physical condition, then my sword lost its purchase on the rock and dropped into the darkness below. I reached into the inventory without breaking focus, found a blade still attached to one of the store gang members, pulled it free, and drove it into the wall in the same motion. The descent resumed, this time with the added stability of the corpse platform building beneath me, the bodies stacking and shifting as I moved down through them, bleeding off velocity with every meter. At the top of the cliff, Tang Wu was still standing. Shifting Shadow watched him activate the poison arts with something that looked genuinely like shock. He had calculated that Tang Wu would hold back, that the presence of his granddaughter and the others would keep his most dangerous techniques off the table. Even at the very end, with nothing left to protect and nothing left to lose, every restraint had been removed by his own hand. Shifting Shadow shouted the order to attack without wasting another second. The entire enemy force surged forward simultaneously. Every fighter wanted the personal glory of killing one of the 10 greats. They shoved each other aside, screamed over who would land the killing blow first, and turned the charge into a scramble that served nobody's interest. Tang Wu activated the soul-dementing ghost poison hand. The shockwave of it knocked the charging fighters backward before the first of them closed the distance. Bodies began to deform on contact with the aura. Shifting Shadow screamed at his men to block it. The environment itself began to fail. Everything within the area was taken apart by the toxic force, methodically and completely. They acknowledged it quietly among themselves. If they had not taken the antidote beads beforehand, the poison would have dissolved them where they stood. One man in the group had not fared as well as the others. The aura had aged him, visibly, physically, his body compressed by the toxins into the appearance of a frail and ancient man who could barely hold himself upright without a stick. He looked around in genuine horror and demanded to know how everyone else was unaffected. The muscular woman tossed something toward him without particular concern. It struck him and his body reversed itself immediately, the damage undone in seconds. Then screaming cut across the quiet, desperate, raw, begging for help from somewhere on the battlefield. Tong Wu had one of the enemy soldiers by the face and was crushing the life out of him with his bare hand. He acknowledged the antidote beads without any particular emotion. He understood that they had come to this mountain fully prepared, with the sole purpose of killing him. Then, he told them something he wanted them to understand clearly before this was finished. The man standing in front of them was still Tang Wu, one of the 10 greats of the Murim, and he refused, with every fiber of what remained in him, to accept that something as small as an antidote bead was sufficient to stop someone like him. He launched himself. As he closed the distance, Tang Wu extended his hand and drove a surge of poisonous, toxic energy outward through the air between them. The muscular woman had no interest in waiting to see where it went. She swung her massive blade directly at Tang Wu with a force that disrupted the advancing poison energy and pushed him backward in the same motion. She had broken through his mana, she announced. Tang Wu flicked his fingers, and several needles left his hand in the same motion. Shifting Shadow intercepted them before they reached her. He told Tang Wu with comfortable confidence that a hidden weapon would never be enough against opponents like them. Then both of them felt that something was wrong. Those were not poisonous needles. They were fire needles. The explosion detonated between them at point-blank range. The third member of their group was already in the air, charging directly at Tang Wu. He screamed that Tang Wu was a crazy old man hiding behind hidden weapons like a coward and demanded a direct, honest fight. He activated Shadowed Phantom Bloom as he came. Tang Wu pointed out, with complete calm, that he found the accusation of unfairness somewhat rich coming from a man who had arrived as part of a 3-against-1 arrangement on a mountain that had been surrounded in advance. Then he released the poison bombs. Countless flower-shaped explosive charges erupted across the battlefield in rapid succession. The man pushed forward through the assault with increasing frustration, cursing between detonations that the Tang clan had truly earned every word of their reputation for being the most petty and underhanded fighters in the martial world. Tang Wu moved in the middle of one of those bursts, using the smoke and noise as cover, and drove a single poisonous needle precisely into the man's foot. Tang Wu looked at him with cold satisfaction and said simply that he had finally caught him, driving a poisonous needle into the man's leg and using the force of the strike to pull him forward simultaneously. His other hand was already in position for the follow-up. The man read the danger and reacted on instinct, raising his sword to intercept. The defense accomplished nothing. The attack went through it cleanly, and multiple needles buried themselves across his body in rapid succession. The poison moved fast. His limbs locked up as the pressure point technique took hold. Tang Wu grabbed him by the hair and pulled him close. He said, with the particular quietness of absolute certainty, that he would begin with the eyes. For daring to look at Tang Hua, he drove his hand forward and took them. The scream that followed had no words in it. Before Tang Wu could finish the matter, an attack came down from above, the thunderstick technique. That had not been a saber technique. The real martial art behind it was palm-based and considerably more advanced than anything the man had shown before. Shifting Shadow announced Tang Wu's name across the battlefield and came forward with the thunderclap 100-striked palm fully activated. Tang Wei answered with the delusional 6 acupoint blood hand. The two techniques met and the shockwave between them rolled outward in every direction. Tang Wu held his ground for a moment, then found himself being pushed back. Shifting Shadow smiled and observed that Tang Wu's internal energy appeared to be running low. Both fighters drove into each other again, and the collision sent another shockwave rolling across the ruined battlefield. Nearby, the man Tang Wu had blinded was beyond rational thought. His eyes, he kept saying, the eyes he had used to appreciate beauty, destroyed by an old man's bare hand. He was done waiting. He hurled his sword at Tang Wu with everything he had left in his body. Shifting Shadow immediately dodged the attack, causing it to fly straight toward the old man. The old man managed to block it, but the force behind the strike was overwhelming. Before he could recover, Shifting Shadow seized the opportunity and drove an attack straight into his stomach, sending him flying backward. Water Shadow was already waiting. She raised her weapon and swung with perfect timing, smacking him like a golf ball and launching him even farther across the battlefield. The blinded man kept screaming, still cursing, still promising that the old man would be dragged down alongside whatever he thought he was protecting. Shifting Shadow told them to wait and hold their positions. All three of them stood over Tang Wu and found themselves unable to fully process what they were looking at. They looked at each other and found no explanation that satisfied. Tang Wu launched himself forward again. The enemies came to meet him, and in the collision, the ground beneath them betrayed them entirely. Poisonous plants buried at intervals across the battlefield activated simultaneously. As the massive explosion erupted, a third figure burst through the smoke. It was Water Shadow. She immediately unleashed a strike, but the old man managed to block it. Not willing to give him a second to breathe, she followed up with a barrage of attacks. Yet the old man dodged every single one, again and again. Water Shadow couldn't believe her eyes. The old man had been targeting the same spots the entire time. All three opponents shouted that it was useless and launched a combined resistance. Tang Wu absorbed and blocked it cleanly, then answered with the explosive flower poison attacks in a coordinated burst that produced a detonation large enough to fill the surrounding area in the smoke that followed. Tang Wu made his decision. Shifting Shadow had to be eliminated before the man recovered his composure. The window was now or it was gone. He drove forward at full speed directly toward Shifting Shadow. The muscular woman stepped into his path before he reached him. She appeared there with a smirk that said she had been anticipating exactly this moment, and she had no intention of moving. Then she bit down hard on his arm. The pain was immediate and significant. Behind her, Shifting Shadow was already beginning to recover his footing. Tang Wu read the situation with absolute clarity. If Shifting Shadow regained his composure, the window closed permanently. There would not be another moment like this one. Tang Wu made the calculation and accepted the cost. He decided to sacrifice the arm. Then the old man drove a powerful palm strike into his stomach, sending him flying straight out of the mountain. With him gone, the old man was left alone on the cliffs. My guy then turned his attention to the two remaining survivors. The old man slowly advanced toward the muscular woman and her subordinate. He was completely out of internal energy. Every hidden weapon he possessed had already been used. Nothing remained at his disposal. All he had left was his old, broken body. Even so, Tang Wu suddenly charged forward and threw a punch straight at the muscular woman. She responded with a punch of her own, and when their fists collided, the impact was tremendous. Blood burst from both of their mouths as the force pushed them backward several steps. Before either of them could recover, the one-eyed man Tang Wu had blinded earlier rushed forward in fury. He screamed in disbelief, unable to accept what he had just witnessed. He mocked Tang Wu for using the lazy donkey roll and ridiculed him for relying on such a shameless technique. In his eyes, someone recognized as one of the 10 greats shouldn't fight that way. Tang Wu answered with a cold death glare. Long ago, he had already thrown honor away. Without hesitation, Tang Wu unleashed a brutal kick. The muscular woman immediately gritted her teeth in annoyance. Instead of helping her fallen ally, she grabbed him by the leg and slammed him into the ground. At that point, she looked more interested in beating her teammate than fighting Tang Wu. Still consumed by rage, the muscular woman continued assaulting the defeated man before finally tossing him aside. Tang Wu then stood proudly and declared that he would never be defeated by the likes of them. He condemned them as cowards who lacked the resolve to face death. They possessed neither the courage nor the determination to sacrifice anything meaningful. With nothing left to hold back, both Tang Wu and the muscular woman charged at each other once more. The sun slowly rose over the horizon, casting its light across the battlefield. Drops of blood fell onto the ground as the morning light finally revealed the outcome. The muscular woman had been defeated. The one-eyed man watched the scene and felt something close to his mind breaking. Even with 3 shadows and more than 100 warriors behind them, they had failed to kill a single wounded, one-handed old man. It should have been impossible. It felt completely absurd. Tang Wu began walking toward him. He screamed, begging Tang Wu to stay back, calling him a monster rather than a human being. Far below the cliff, a figure had begun climbing upward, but the scene above held firm. Tang Wu and the terrified survivor, closing the distance between them one step at a time. Tang Wu murmured something quietly in response. The one-eyed man stared at him in confusion, wondering if Tang Wu had finally lost his mind entirely. The old man released his grip on Water Shadow and raised his hand toward the one-eyed man, who looked moments away from soiling himself. That was the opening Shifting Shadow had been waiting for. But the old man sensed his presence just as fast and turned. Then he froze. The face staring back at him was his granddaughter's. Before he could process it, the blade drove into his chest. It was Shifting Shadow, wearing Hua's face. He wrenched the old man forward and hurled him away. Tang Wu hit the ground hard. The one-eyed man stood there in a panic, barely able to get the words out, asking if it was truly Shifting Shadow standing before him. If that earlier punch from Tang Wu had carried even a fraction more internal energy, he would have died instantly. A grin spread across his face. Victory belonged to them now. Hearing those words, the one-eyed man felt his confidence flood back in. Moments ago, he had genuinely believed he was going to die. Now he began listing everything he intended to do to Tang Wu. Gouge out his eyes, sever his limbs, slit his throat last of all. He even declared he would climb down the cliff afterward and deal with the women waiting below. Then he stopped mid-sentence. His voice disappeared. Tang Wu was still moving, then raised his thumb forward. Even now, even at the very end, he still refused to surrender. Tang Wu's thoughts turned inward. The technique he was about to use was a pale shadow of its original form. Incomplete, imperfect. But if this was truly where his life ended, then imperfect would have to be enough. He activated the heaven-shrouding pedal rain. The one-eyed man stared in complete horror. Tang Wu charged. Before any of them could react, he had seized the muscular woman, Shifting Shadow, and the one-eyed man all at once, pulling them together. Then, he revealed the final truth. The hidden weapons were detonating. A massive explosion swallowed everything. The battlefield vanished beneath the blast. When it cleared, Tongwu's body was thrown wide. He began falling from the cliff. As he dropped through the air, his thoughts drifted to Hua. He had wanted to see her married before the end. More than anything else, he wanted her to survive. Far below, a figure sat waiting at the base of the cliff. Sosum. He looked upward and understood immediately what was falling toward him. A slow smirk spread across his face. At last, Tongwu was coming to him.